Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into something cold, bone-deep cold, the kind of cold where your breath crystallizes before your nose and your fingertips go numb through 3 layers of gloves. Tonight we're wandering the frozen streets of Victorian England, where soot lines the Seiche line, gas lamps glow like dying stars, and people survive winter one coal scuttle at a time. Spoiler, you probably won't survive this. Not without chilblains, a hacking cough, or a suspiciously Victorian cause of death. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. London fog or LA haze. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes to a slate grey sky stretched above London's rooftops, dusted with last night's snow. The window you're looking through is patterned with frost, curlicues like lace. So delicate it feels wrong to breathe on them. Inside the room, your breath clouds in the air even though there's a fire going. Sort of. It's the last lumps of coal in a stingy little grate, trying their best to pretend they're still on fire. They're not. Outside, the street is a narrow canyon of terraced houses. Their bricks dark with soot, and their chimneys exhaling weak plumes into the frigid air. The sounds are muffled. Snow does that, turns a busy world into a whisper. But there's still life down there. A milkman with red ears and a horse that looks personally offended by winter. A woman dragging a basket of laundry, her boots crunching over packed ice. A boy in a cap that used to be brown probably, but now it's just grey with age and street grime. He slips and nearly goes down on the cobbles. Doesn't. Laughs. Keeps running. You finally pull yourself out from under a pile of blankets, each one scratchier than the last. Victorian bedding isn't made for comfort, it's made for survival. Wool, flannel, sometimes even newspaper stuffed under the mattress to trap the rising cold. The floorboards beneath your bare feet feel like touching stone. You regret every decision leading up to this moment. Socks. Where are your socks? There's a bowl of water on the washstand, frozen over. You chip out a this with the corner of a comb. Morning ablutions, optional. The soap smells vaguely of ash and doesn't lather. You splash your face with a handful of icy liquid, and you're more awake than you've ever been in your life. Congratulations, you now understand the Victorian morning struggle. Your clothing is stiff, the air so dry it feels sharp in your nose. As you dress, you can hear the clatter of carts on the road and the occasional call of a newsboy selling papers. There's a thin line of smoke rising from the chimney across the street. You can smell it. Coal mixed with cabbage, breakfast maybe, or laundry water boiling. Could be both. The line is blurry here. As you step out onto the stoop, the cold slams into you like a wall. Your breath puffs out in clouds, and snow crunches beneath your boots, layered over slush that has frozen and thawed a few too many times. You have to walk carefully, unless you're in the mood to experience Victorian surgery. Spoiler, you're not. It's still early, and the city is waking slowly. A few pedestrians scurry past, muffled up in scarves and long coats. Some wear hand-me-downs of hand-me-downs. Others are finely dressed, top hats and fur trims, making their way toward carriages that gleam even in this dim light. The gas lamps are still on, barely. A weak flicker against the encroaching brightness. You notice how the snow around them is tinged with yellow, like everything else in this city that once was white. The lamplighter hasn't come around yet to snuff them out for the day. As you walk, you catch a whiff of something sweet. Roasted chestnuts from a vendor huddled behind a cart. His cheeks are ruddy from the heat of the brazier. He waves a mittened hand at you. His prices are laughable. You keep moving. A historical note while we're here. During Victorian winters, temperatures regularly dropped below freezing, and most homes had only one heated room, the kitchen or the parlour if you were lucky. Bedrooms were glacial. And yes, water bowls froze, ink congealed, and pipes burst. In 1895, they said the Thames froze enough for people to skate on it again, reviving echoes of the old frost fairs, but more on that later. Also, a weird one, Queen Victoria was terrified of cold drafts. She kept most windows sealed, wore multiple layers indoors, and had foot warmers stashed under every surface. Her obsession with warmth shaped court etiquette. If the Queen was cold, everyone was cold, not exactly an improvement for the servants. Now here's something historians like to bicker about. How accurate is our modern image of Victorian winters as endlessly grim and grey? Some argue this bleakness is a product of literature, thanks Dickens, and a modern lens. Others point to the smog, poor housing, and actual weather records to say, no, it was genuinely that miserable. Truth probably sits somewhere in between. Yes, they had crisp blue sky days too, but you'd still freeze your ears off before lunchtime. As you wander, your path takes you past a row of iron railings coated with frost. You tap one with your glove just to hear the ring. The city is starting to pick up now. The sounds swell, but the cold stays. Children in hobnailed boots stomp around trying to keep warm. A man opens his shop front shutters and curses under his breath as a pane falls out shattered from the cold. And then there's the sky, pale, featureless, but slowly shifting from grey to gold as the sun attempts to rise. You glance up at the chimneys, dozens of them, clustered together like the spines of some industrial beast, and wonder how many fires are lit behind them. How many people are watching frost creep across their ceilings, or trying to scrape together enough coal for one more hour of warmth? It's morning in Victorian London, and winter isn't going anywhere. You duck back indoors, teeth chattering like dice in a cup, and the door closes with a soft thud behind you. The meagre warmth from earlier hasn't improved. If anything, the cold has gotten cockier. It sneaks under the door, curls around your ankles, and settles deep into the walls like it pays rent. You stamp your feet and breathe into your hands, which do very little for either. This is a typical winter morning in a working-class Victorian home, where insulation is a fantasy and warmth is something you ration like sugar. The fireplace, the room's single heat source, is smouldering again, trying not to admit defeat. A few dull coals glow at the bottom like dying stars, but the flame's out. A poker leans nearby, useless now, and the coal scuttle is nearly empty. Someone's been scraping the dregs. You glance at the narrow mantel above, a few wooden matchboxes, a chipped porcelain figure of a shepherd, and a yellowed photo in a thin frame. Family or memory, probably both. The air inside smells like boiled potatoes and damp wool. You can practically taste it. Everything has that slightly smoky undertone, not from cooking, but from coal dust that creeps into everything, lungs included. Your coat comes off, but not all the layers. Indoors isn't that different from out. There's a loud creak overhead, someone pacing in the upper room, and then the familiar clunk of a kettle settling onto the stove. That stove's been modified, you realise, adapted from wood burning to coal, because that's what the city runs on now. Coal is king, even when it's expensive, even when it's filthy, even when it kills you slowly. And coal is not a guaranteed luxury here. Working class families scrape together what they can for a sack. The really poor? They collect nutty slack, the powdery leftover bits swept up from delivery yards, or trade scraps for coal from dealers who know a dozen ways to cheat you with a smile. It burns fast, leaves a mess, and won't keep a room warm for long. But it's better than nothing. Sometimes. You crouch beside the hearth, palm hovering over the remaining heat. There's still a chill radiating from the bricks. They've soaked up the cold and won't let it go without a bribe. You rub your hands together and think about tea, or at least something hot and vaguely tea-shaped. Let's talk about these walls while we wait for the water to boil. Cracked plaster, faint stains from water damage, wooden beams exposed in one corner, patched over with whatever was at hand, newspaper, old cloth, a miracle or two. They don't just fail to hold heat in, they seem to invite the cold to settle in and stay a while. And Victorian landlords, let's just say their priorities often hovered somewhere between build more rooms and don't ask questions. By the way, some working class homes in London were what they called back-to-backs, dwellings literally attached at the rear, with no windows back there and minimal airflow. Combine that with open flame cooking, bad chimneys and winter damp, you've got a solid case for why people constantly coughed and why the wallpaper occasionally melted off. Meanwhile, you finally hear the faint whistle of the kettle. Small victories. A cup is fetched, some leaves or dregs of leaves steeped in hot water, and maybe a spoonful of sugar if you've got the luxury. Milk is a maybe. Cream? In your dreams. Still, it's hot. You wrap your fingers around the cup like it's sacred. It kind of is. Let's throw in a fun oddity. Some Victorian homes kept a bed wagon, a wheeled box you'd pull in front of the hearth to warm up the bedding before sleep. Fire hazard? Sure, but at least your sheets didn't feel like sheets of ice. Another popular trick, warming a brick in the fire, wrapping it in cloth, and slipping it under the covers. It's the 19th century version of a heated blanket, if you don't mind the occasional burn mark. You hear the neighbour yelling through the wall. Again. Thin walls, thin patience, she's shouting at a child or a husband, hard to tell. but her voice carries through like she's standing right next to you. Moments later, a crash, then silence. Then a baby starts crying upstairs. Just another morning soundtrack. It's easy to romanticize these homes from afar, imagine lace curtains, quaint kitchens, everyone gathered around a hearth telling stories. But up close, Victorian interiors are practical, cramped and dark. Paint peels, mould creepens in. Windows rattle in their frames, floors sag. And in winter, everything slows down. Even time, days stretch long when you're cold. You count the hours by how often you need to refill the fire, or how long it's been since you could feel your toes. And this raises a debate historians love to fight over. How did these households actually manage day to day in the cold? Some argue extended families living together helped preserve warmth, body heat, shared chores, efficient use of fuel. Others point out how diseases like tuberculosis spread so easily in these tight quarters, arguing that overcrowding was more deadly than helpful. The truth probably sits somewhere messy in between, like everything else in this era. You wander into the narrow hallway. The walls are close enough to touch with both elbows. A coat hangs on a peg, wet, still dripping from yesterday's storm. There's a draft creeping in from under the back door, and a piece of fabric has been wedged there in defence. The kitchen, such as it is, smells like onion and coal smoke. A stew, perhaps, if there's meat left. Maybe just water thickened with flour and salt. There's a certain beauty to it, though. A resilience. Life doesn't pause for winter. It adapts. Families gather around the stove with mended socks, patchwork quilts, and hands that know how to sew, scrub, and salvage. Kids play games with buttons and bits of string. Adults talk quietly about rent and factory hours, and maybe dream of affording an actual goose for Christmas. You head back toward the hearth. Someone has managed to revive the fire slightly, just enough for the glow to push the shadows a bit farther back. The room feels almost warm now. Your hands thaw slowly, painfully. Your tea is mostly gone, but the last sip is still hot. Outside, the sky is brightening, but inside, this home clings to the soft, dark, stretching warmth from every scrap it can. There's a chill in your spine that hasn't left since you woke up. It probably won't, not until spring. The fire hasn't done much for the air beyond a 3-foot radius. It's still a little warmer to stay close to the hearth, but the rest of the house has a lingering dampness that seeps into your sleeves. Eventually, though, you have to head back outside, because as much as staying in sounds ideal, this isn't an era where anyone really gets to stay in. The city moves, and if you don't move with it, it forgets you exist. You step back into the street and immediately regret it. The cold punches you in the mouth. It's aggressive in that very Victorian way, like it's just here to see who it can break. The snow has half melted into a slush that's been churned by cartwheels and boot soles into something closer to soup. And not a good soup. Think grey, gritty, possibly alive. It coats everything, curbs, shoes, the underbellies of passing dogs, and it never seems to melt fully, just rearranges itself. Above you, the fog is coming in low again. Not a charming mist, either. This is the kind of fog that belongs in horror stories. Thick, yellow-brown, almost oily. It lingers in the alleyways and curls under doors. You can smell it before you can really see it. A strange mix of chimney soot, rotting hay and sulphur. London's famous pea soupers, romantic if you've never met one in person, lethal if you have weak lungs. You head toward the main road, past narrow alleys that disappear into smoke and shadows. The gaslights lining the streets are still lit even though it's morning. They flicker behind frosted glass, casting an eerie glow over the cobblestones. Some are already starting to hiss and sputter out as the daylight strengthens, but they've done their job, or tried to. Let's talk gaslight for a moment. These lamps started appearing around London in the early 1800s and became a symbol of modernity. By the time Queen Victoria took the throne, they were everywhere. On streets, in theatres, even in homes of the semi-affluent. They replaced candles and oil lamps and allowed for longer working hours, safer streets, and arguably the birth of nightlife as we know it. But here's the dark twist. Gaslights weren't exactly safe. They gave off carbon monoxide, frequently exploded, and leaked gas into buildings. Romantic glow, sure. But also a solid chance of asphyxiation. Still, there's something about the way they burn this morning. The light is dim, golden, almost struggling, like it's not sure it should still be awake. It filters through the fog in streaks, painting shadows onto walls and illuminating nothing in particular. A man walks past with a lantern of his own, swinging from one gloved handle. You can't see his face, just the outline of a coat, a hat, and breath fogging the air as he mutters to himself. You pass by shop fronts, some with shutters still down, others trying to look cheerful in the face of biting wind. A greengrocer has arranged some half-frozen turnips and winter apples in a neat pile. A butcher swats away a dog sniffing at a pig's head on a display. Everything smells vaguely like meat and coal, and yet somehow your stomach growls anyway. A historical aside while your boots crunch and splash through muck. During the height of industrialisation, London's fog became infamous, and it wasn't just weather, it was pollution thickened by cold air and pressure systems. Some scholars argue it's where the word smog began. It got so bad that there are records of people walking into the Thames by mistake or being hit by carriages they couldn't see, or even suffocating outright. And yet people lived with it. Some even called it cosy. That's either resilience or very aggressive denial. A stranger brushes past you, a woman with a veil drawn over her face. Not morning attire, just smart fogwear. The truly cautious wear dampened cloths over their noses, hoping to filter the air. Doesn't do much, but it makes you feel like you're doing something. A few children scurry past, dragging sticks through the slush, laughing in defiance of the cold. Their shoes are soaked, their faces are red with windburn, but they're laughing so they win. Down the block, a lamplighter is finishing his route. He walks with a pole almost as tall as himself, extinguishing one flickering globe after another. He pauses now and then to tighten a fixture or scrape soot from the glass. It's not glamorous work, but it's necessary, and oddly satisfying to watch. There's something rhythmic about it. Climb, twist, snuff, climb again, and always in silence, as if noise would disturb the fragile line between gaslight and fog. And now the fun fact you didn't ask for. Lamplighters, sometimes called Learys, were so embedded in the culture that they inspired songs and poetry. Children idolised them, cities relied on them. But as electricity crept in toward the end of the 19th century, the profession began to vanish. By the early 1900s, the Leary was already becoming folklore. The fog thickens as the sun rises higher, which feels wrong, doesn't it? But that's how London worked in winter. Sometimes brighter light just revealed how opaque the world actually was. Buildings vanish into clouds at eye level. Horses appear out of nowhere, their hooves muffled, steam rising off their backs. You almost get clipped by a carriage you didn't see until it was 2 feet from your knees. The driver swears at you like it's your fault, which, fine, maybe it is. Here's the thing no one tells you, the fog isn't quiet. It hums, a low electric hum of the city adjusting to a world it can't quite see. You hear footsteps without people, voices without faces, wheels without carts. It's disorienting, beautiful maybe, but in the way that makes you double-check behind you now and then. And scholars? They still argue over whether the fog was really as bad as the myths make it out. Some say modern writers and filmmakers have exaggerated the gloom, turned it into a trope. Others pull out old diaries and medical records and say, no, actually, it really was like walking through soup flavoured with death. Both are probably right. Depends on the year, the neighbourhood, the wind. By the time you reach the corner, your coat is damp, your hair has turned to rope, and your eyelashes are beaded with dew. You blink through it and lean against a lamppost that's gone cold. A street hawker passes, calling out something unintelligible through the fog. His voice echoes strangely, like it's bouncing off clouds. The fog doesn't lift. You just get used to it. You start to navigate by memory, not sight. That fence with the bent spike, the sound of horses near the bakery, the corner where the butcher shouts every morning. You know the path, even if you can't see it. And somewhere far behind you the last gas lamp gutters out. You pull your collar tighter against your neck as the fog settles deeper into your bones, like it's decided to take up permanent residence. The street's grown quieter now, not because people are gone, but because the fog swallows sound the same way it swallows light. Still, the city moves. Figures appear and vanish like shadows on stage, drifting past you with only the barest sound of feet on wet cobblestones. But what catches your eye now is how they're dressed. Layers upon layers, every inch covered. Functional, yes, but also deliberate. It's winter in Victorian England, and what you wear in this weather says as much about who you are as where you're going. You pass a woman, middle-aged, jaw set like stone, wearing a thick woolen shawl pulled tightly over her shoulders. It's wrapped so well that only her eyes are visible, dark and sharp beneath the brim of her bonnet. The fabric's been mended so many times it's hard to tell where the original ends and the repairs begin. Her hands are tucked into a fur muff, cheap rabbit by the look of it, and her boots have been resoled at least twice. Functional, reused, stretched to the last thread, but dignified in their way. Not far behind her, two young men walk side by side, top hats low, shoulders a stiff. Greatcoats swing around their ankles, lined in velvet and fastened with ornate brass buttons. One carries a cane, not for walking, of course, but as a statement. They look like they've stepped out of a Punch cartoon, all angles and self-importance. And they're doing what everyone does in winter in London, pretending not to shiver. It's not just about staying warm. In Victorian England, winter clothing is a kind of theatre. Every layer tells the world something: your wealth, your health, your morals, your marriage status, even your Marlborough mood. And it's more complex than just rich or poor. A widow, for instance, wears strict black head to toe, often with a mourning veil that drapes like night over her face. Mourning fashion is an entire universe of its own, and heaven help the woman who comes out in lavender too soon after a husband's death. People talk. There's a girl with a patched cloak and a skirt too thin for this kind of cold, walking quickly as if speed will outpace frostbite. Her hands are bare. She clutches a parcel wrapped in newsprint, and her boots are soaked through, the soles already curling upward like leaves. And then a well-dressed man passes, a beaver fur top hat set just so, and a cashmere scarf looped artfully at his neck. His gloves are real leather. He looks like he's warm. He's not. Here's something odd about Victorian fashion that historians still scratch their heads over. Women's clothing, especially among the upper and middle classes, was not built for winter. Despite the layers, the corsets, the petticoats, the hijab skirts dragging snow like brooms behind them, they weren't especially warm. Cloaks and shawls helped, sure, but there was very little focus on insulation or weatherproofing. No one had invented a down parka. No one was walking around in Gore-Tex, just wool and hope. Fringe fact time. During especially harsh winters, wealthier women sometimes wore something called a warming petticoat, a skirt with little pockets sewn inside where you could slip heated bricks or coals in metal containers. Think of it as a fire hazard with a waistband. It worked until it didn't. There were more than a few news stories about skirts going up in smoke after a stumble or a sudden draft. You step around a vendor's cart now, piled high with scarves and mittens, some clearly handmade. He's shouting something hoarse and half lost in the fog. "Woolen caps! Ladies' muffs! 2p for warmth, missus!" He sees you looking and thrusts a pair of mittens in your direction. Thick, clumsy things, more patched than original. You wave him off, but not unkindly. There's something admirable about his hustle, even if his own nose is blue with cold and his breath's coming out in steam. Further along, you stop near a tailor's shop. The window is dressed with mannequins in winter finery, military-style coats with epaulets, fur-lined cuffs, cravats in deep jewel tones. It's aspirational dressing for those who can afford to care. Outside, a boy is stoking a fire, eyes narrowed against the smoke that curls up past his sleeves. You watch him work, then catch sight of your own reflection in the glass. Fogged, streaked, slightly distorted. You look like a ghost here. Everyone does. This city doesn't do warmth in a generous way. It expects you to earn it, and the clothing reflects that. Even for the wealthy, fashion leans towards structure, not comfort. Stiff collars, tight sleeves, laced boots. Everything tailored, everything buttoned to the neck. Even in their layers, the rich look restricted, wrapped not just in wool, but in expectation. Meanwhile, the poor scavenge whatever keeps the frost off. Sackcloth, newspaper, cast-offs with holes under the arms and mismatched buttons. And then there's the debate that occasionally surfaces among scholars and fashion historians. Did Victorians really dress for practicality in winter? Or were they slaves to fashion even at the cost of comfort? Some argue that practicality was key for the lower classes. They dressed to survive. But the middle and upper classes? They layered up in absurd, impractical combinations simply to keep up appearances. Others insist even the poorest found ways to make their rags stylish. Again, the truth is somewhere in between. Part pride, part necessity, part sheer bloody-minded stubbornness. Now you're walking again, and the snow's beginning to fall in slow, lazy spirals. It adds a quietness to everything, softening edges and rounding out the city's sharp corners. A woman pushes a pram past you, bundled in a tartan shawl so thick it doubles as a cloak. Inside the pram, the baby's swaddled almost comically tight. only a pink nose poking out of the cocoon. You catch a glimpse of old boots beneath the carriage, worn, flaking, clearly second-hand. Probably the third baby they've carried. You round the corner and find yourself behind a man hauling a delivery sled. Yes, a sled, stacked high with parcels. The wheels don't do well in the snow, so for many sleds become the winter wagon. His coat is threadbare, but tied around his waist is the sheepskin, probably salvaged from a butcher's discard pile, and it sways with each step. He's clever, creative, cold, and just when you think you've seen every version of winter attire, a coach rumbles past, pulled by two horses in full feathered gear. Inside, through the fogged glass, you see fur, feathers, and velvet all in one frame. A woman leans back in the seat, her gloved hand raised in half-hearted greeting to someone outside. Her hat is enormous. Her fingers glitter with rings, and she looks bored. Possibly cold, but mostly just unimpressed with the weather, or maybe with everything. The gap between warmth and cold in this city is only partly about coal and clothing. The rest of it lives in the seams, how well your coat fits, how many gloves you own, how much you're willing to suffer to keep up appearances. You adjust your scarf, feeling the chill slide down your collar like a thief and keep walking. It's either that or stop and let the frost win. Your path leads you toward a narrower street now, one of those crooked, ancient little lanes that feels like it was built by someone with a shaky hand and a grudge against symmetry. The fog's still thick, curling through the air like it owns the place. But now it's mixed with something else. Smoke, maybe, and something more bitter. You wrinkle your nose. That's not coal smoke, that's soot. Pure scorched soot. And suddenly you remember, this is chimney sweep territory. You hear it before you see anything. A clatter, then a cough, then the high-pitched scrape of metal against brick. You look up and catch movement. There, just at the edge of a rooftop, a small figure moving like a spider. Arms and legs angular, blackened by soot, face covered in a scarf. You'd think it was a vidao if it weren't for the occasional glint of metal in their hand. It's a climbing boy, or girl, you can't really tell. No one's checking. They're up there to clean chimneys, and to do it fast, cheap, and preferably without dying. You step closer to the alley where the ladders lean, and there he is, your chimney master. He's wide, coal-streaked, with a face like cracked leather, and a voice like gravel soaked in gin. He's barking orders upward, squinting at the sky, one hand on a brush that's taller than you. His assistant, a boy who can't be older than 10, is already halfway into a second chimney, coughing as he goes. You watch his boots vanish, then his hands, then nothing. And here's the uncomfortable historical reality slapping you in the face. Child chimney sweeps weren't just real, they were common. Often orphans or sold into labour by desperate families, these children were small enough to fit into the tightest flues. Their job? Shimmy up, brush as they went, knock the soot down and try not to get stuck. Or suffocate, or fall. They were expected to work year-round, but winter? That was the real horror show. Ice in the flues, frozen hands on brick, and chimneys being lit while kids were still inside them because someone miscommunicated, or just didn't care. The master catches you staring and gives a nod like you've seen enough. You glance down at your gloves. Suddenly they feel impossibly luxurious. At least your fingers aren't bleeding or black with soot. Up above, the sweep re-emerges from the chimney top, face grey with ash. He shakes out his brush, leans back on the roofline and breathes deep. It's hard to tell what's smoke and what's breath now. He's probably done for the moment. But only for the moment. There's always another chimney, another climb, another cold brick throat to scrape clean before the next fire can be safely lit. You step back and look at the buildings around you. Every house has a chimney. Some have 3, 4, 5. The skyline looks like a graveyard of blackened fingers reaching into the sky, all coughing smoke into the already foul air. You can see why these sweeps are always in demand, but it's not a job people do forever. They either grow too big, too damaged, or too dead to continue. Here's a deeply weird and very real thing. Many climbing boys used to suffer from a condition called soot wart, a form of cancer caused by constant exposure to carcinogens in chimney soot. It showed up early, sometimes before puberty. Combine that with broken bones, stunted growth, and respiratory damage, and you've got a pretty bleak resume for adulthood, if they made it that far. The Victorians, of course, eventually noticed that shoving children into burning chimneys was maybe a bad idea. Laws were passed, slowly, grudgingly, and often ignored. The Chimney Sweepers Act of 1834 tried to limit the practice, but it wasn't until later in the century that meaningful change came. And even then, enforcement was patchy. The machines that eventually replaced human sweeps were expensive, unreliable, or just plain unavailable in poorer areas. So the boys kept climbing. You make your way down the lane, boots slipping slightly on patches of ice and coal dust. Around the corner, a sweep leans over a bucket of water, splashing his face with a gloved hand. The water turns black almost instantly. He spits into the street and goes back to work. His knuckles are raw. His eyes are red. And he's humming to himself oddly. A jaunty little tune, as if the soot hasn't already found a home in his lungs. He notices you and gives a crooked grin, teeth flashing white against his grime-darkened skin. There's something unnerving in that contrast, what? Like a Halloween mask with no holiday. You nod. He winks, then turns away to coil a length of rope. And here's the scholarly debate that surfaces now and again. Did these kids choose this work because it was all that stood between them and the starvation? Or were they coerced, tricked, trapped by cruel masters and desperate circumstances? The reality is a mess of both. Some saw it as a necessary evil, others as a systemic failure. Today historians still argue about how widespread the abuse was, how willing the children were, how complicit the society that allowed it to continue for so long. You pass another alley where a chimney sweep is teaching a younger child how to prepare the brush. He's patient, surprisingly, gently guiding the boy's hands, showing him how the rods twist together. For a second it almost looks like kindness, until you remember what he's being trained to do, and where he'll be sent next. You take one last look upward. The rooftops vanish into the fog, but you can still make out faint movement here and there. More silhouettes, more sweeps. This city is stitched together by these invisible workers, scuttling through the veins of buildings, scraping out the residue of survival. You'll never look at a chimney the same way again. You move on, the scent of ash clinging to your coat. Somewhere a church bell rings, soft, echoing, as if the city is yawning, or warning. The street opens up again. Little wider now, but the sky's still low, still grey, still pressing, and you know that by this evening those same chimneys will be lit again. Fires roaring, soot rising, and more children climbing into the cold, narrow dark. Your stomach growls again, louder this time, loud enough that a passing mongrel perks its ears before trotting off through a puddle of black slush. The hunger in this part of the city is more than metaphor. It hangs in the air, just beneath the fog and soot, something bitter and meaty and slightly burned. You follow your nose down a side street that smells like food, or at least the promise of it. Not roast beef or pastries or anything remotely luxurious. No. This is the aroma of stewed bones, week-old vegetables, and bread that's more crust than crumb. Welcome to the winter diet of the poor. Bland, repetitive, and often not enough. You reach a small brick building, unmarked except for the weary queue forming outside. People stand shoulder to shoulder, coats wrapped tight, hats pulled low, bowls clutched like passports. This is a poor law soup kitchen, one of many scattered across London's worst hit districts. In winter, they become lifelines, doling out warmth one ladle at a time. You join the edge of the line and try not to breathe through your nose. It smells edible, yes, but only just. Inside the kitchen is a clatter of tin and steam. A stern-faced woman stands behind a massive pot, stirring it with a ladle the size of a shovel. She works without looking up, dishing out greyish soup into bowls, mugs, anything that will hold liquid. It's thick with barley and cabbage, sometimes a hint of ham if the donations have been kind. Usually it's just flavour. You receive your portion and find a spot by the wall, balancing it in your frozen fingers. The first sip is mostly heat, then salt, then a kind of vegetable aftertaste that could be carrot or could be turnip, or possibly just wishful thinking. Still, it's something. And when you've been walking in this weather, wrapped in wet wool and hunger, even the worst soup tastes like survival. Let's talk about that word for a moment, survival. Because that's really what eating in the Victorian underclass was about. Not fullness, not satisfaction, just the bare minimum to get through another shift, another hour, another mile. Many working families couldn't afford proper meals. They lived off bread, potatoes, tea, maybe drippings if the butcher was generous. Winter made everything worse. Produce was scarce, prices rose, wages didn't. And if you were out of work, soup kitchens were your best, and often only, option. Now, across the street, there's something stranger happening. a man stands under an awning, huddled next to a cart stacked with something very wrong for winter. Blocks of ice. You blink. Ice in winter? Isn't that redundant? But he's selling something called penny ice, flavoured ice shavings, usually hawked in summer. Except some vendors never stop. Kids still buy them, even now numbing their fingers for a taste of syrup on snow. You watch as a small boy, barefoot of course, hands over a penny and takes his tiny cone. He holds it with two hands, grinning as he licks it like it's gold. And here's your quirky historical fact for the evening. Penny ice was the Victorian equivalent of fast food. Cheap, cold, and often questionably made. The syrup? Mostly coloured sugar water, sometimes dyed with dubious chemicals. The ice? Cut from polluted rivers or imported from Norway, and stored in underground ice wells around the city. Even in winter the trade kept going, fueled by novelty and desperation. Because for a penny, even poor kids could taste something sweet, even if it gave them diarrhea later. You finish your soup, what there was of it, and hand the bowl back. No seconds. The queue has already doubled since you arrived. People file in quietly, each with the same expression, resigned hope, as if maybe this time the soup will taste like memory instead of despair. You move along, stepping back into the street where your boots immediately sink into an icy puddle. Classic. And now here comes the debate. How effective were these soup kitchens and charitable canteens, really? Some historians argue they kept entire neighbourhoods from starving during the worst winters. Others say they were a bandage on a bullet wound, used to justify harsh poor laws and cutbacks in actual systemic support. The truth is, many of them were run by churches and volunteers, funded by local donors, not the government. And while they gave relief, they didn't solve the hunger. They just bought time. You head deeper into the market square now, past stalls barely open, their goods wrapped in cloth to guard against the frost. A baker is hawking yesterday's loaves at half price, hard enough to chip teeth. A fishmonger displays his catch on ice, though half of it looks frozen solid and the smell has already turned. A woman with a baby strapped to her chest is selling roasted chestnuts from a brazier, smoke curling into her eyes. You nod at her and buy a small paper twist of the nuts. They're warm, and in this weather, that counts for everything. Somewhere nearby, a street preacher shouts about sin and salvation, gesturing wildly at the fog. He doesn't seem bothered by the cold, or maybe he is, and this is how he stays warm, ranting against the darkness while steam rises from the cobbles. He draws a small crowd, not because people agree with him, but because he's standing next to a vent where hot air escapes from a bakery basement. It's the Victorian version of heating. You crouch near the edge of the crowd, roasting your hands over your chestnuts. The skins crack softly, releasing the faintest wisp of steam. Sweet, earthy, smoky. They're gone too quickly, but they leave your palms warmer than they were 5 minutes ago. One last thought as you move on. The winter diet of the poor was never about variety. It was about repetition. Gruel, soup, bread, potatoes, tea. If you were lucky, you might get a bit of meat or a pie scraped together from leftovers and dreams, but mostly you just hoped to eat something hot. Every day that you managed that was a small, quiet victory. You pass a boy now, 12, maybe 13, who's pushing a barrow loaded with what looks like bones. Just bones. You think maybe he's a rag and bone collector, but no. These are being delivered to a tavern kitchen. Soup bones, stock bones, barely food, but it's enough to keep the broth going. Enough to sell for a halfpenny a bowl. He whistles as he walks, like it's the most normal job in the world. And in this city this winter, it is. Your breath mists the air as you walk, the wind biting through the seams of your coat and whispering its threats through every gap in your clothing. But the snow crunches differently beneath your boots now, crisper, harder, like something more solid lurks beneath the slush. The Thames is close, you can smell it even before you see it. Cold, wet stone and river silt, the unmistakable tang of city water barely masked by the chill. But what really pulls you forward is the noise, laughter, music, metal on ice. Not what you expect from a frozen river. And yet, here we are. As you step out from the narrow alley, the view opens wide, and there it is. The Great Thames, frozen solid, a sheet of shimmering grey under a low pewter sky. Dozens of Londoners swarm across its surface, men, women, children, wrapped in layers and laughter. The ice creaks under their feet but holds, for now. Wooden stalls line the centre like a pop-up village. Flags flutter weakly in the breeze. It's a miracle. And more than that, it's a frost fair. Yes, you've stumbled into one of those rare, ridiculous moments when the Thames freezes solid enough to become a playground, a market, and a party. You step cautiously onto the ice, boots slipping slightly. It's thick, thicker than you'd think. Local butchers have tested it with pig carcasses. Bakers have walked full ovens across it. That's the standard here. If it can hold a cow, it can hold commerce. The nearest stall is selling hot gin in chipped mugs, steam wafting up in sugary, boozy clouds. You politely decline for now, but your curiosity keeps you circling. You pass a printer's booth stamping souvenir cards with the words "Printed on the Thames, January 1855. The letters are barely legible in the cold, but the novelty is too good to pass up. For a shilling, you can have your name immortalised in ink on ice. There's something surreal about it all. Fire pits dug directly into the frozen river, ringed with benches made of crates. A tent where someone's hosting a puppet show, Punch and Judy, their voices shrill above the wind. A fiddler plays next to a makeshift skating rink, his gloves fingerless, his tempo flawless. Skaters twirl past, some graceful, others flailing, most just showing off. Children ride on makeshift sleds pulled by dogs or older siblings. It's like a dream someone had about fun in the middle of a hard winter, and the city just agreed to believe it. Now, historically speaking, the Thames freezing was rare, but not impossible. It happened more often before the 19th century thanks to the combination of colder winters, what we now call the Little Ice Age, and the design of Old London Bridge, which restricted water flow enough to allow ice to form. But as the bridge was replaced and the climate slowly warmed, these events became less frequent. The Frost Fair of 1814 is often considered the last true one, though smaller versions popped up sporadically after. But let's get weird for a second. At one of these fairs, someone brought an elephant across the ice to prove how solid it was. An elephant. It strolled across near Blackfriars Bridge, unbothered, leaving deep dents where its feet pressed down. Because why not, right? If you're already partying on a frozen river, might as well throw in a circus animal. You move slowly across the ice, watching your footing. A man in a red coat offers you a slice of roasted chestnut pie. You take it. It's warm, flaky, and suspiciously heavy. Probably more lard than fruit, but it does the job. Nearby, someone's set up a printing press and is selling Thames Times bulletins, complete with misspelled headlines and made-up quotes. It's charming and absolutely freezing. You can't feel your nose, but you don't want to leave. There's something about joy in the cold that hits differently. It's not comfortable joy, it's defiant joy. Every laugh is a rebellion. Every footstep on the ice is a risk. Everyone knows the ice could break, the weather could turn, but they're here anyway, because life doesn't stop just because the river did. You crouch near one of the fires and let the heat sink into your gloves. A young woman beside you is singing quietly to her child, who's swaddled so tight he looks like a loaf of bread. Her voice is soft, but the words carry something about snowflakes and angels. The firelight flickers across her face, catching the red in her cheeks and the steam rising off her breath. She nods at you once, that sadient, weary kind of gratitude that's everywhere in winter. And then comes the open question, the thing historians can't quite agree on. Were these frost fairs truly beloved community events, or were they desperate distractions from brutal winters and failing infrastructure? Some argue that they were lifelines for vendors and entertainers, a way to make income when everything else froze. Others suggest they were dangerous spectacles, born of necessity more than celebration. The truth, as always, sits on the ice, shivering, eating pie, and waiting for the thaw. You walk farther down the river, past a tent with tarot readings, and another where a man claims he can juggle flaming coals. He can't. He drops one. You keep moving. Past a row of gamblers dicing in the snow. Past lovers holding hands with bare fingers, because sometimes cold is secondary to closeness. Everyone is here for something, money, mischief, memory. And then you all hear it. A deep, echoing crack beneath your feet. It's not immediate panic, just a quiet pause, like the fair itself has stopped breathing. Then another sound, sharper, closer, ice groaning beneath the weight of joy and fire, and elephants past. A few people turn their heads, one child starts crying, but the fiddler keeps playing. The vendors shout louder, the fire pits blaze higher, because they know the fair is never meant to last. The ice will crack eventually. It always does. That's part of the thrill. The miracle is not that the river froze, but that people still stepped onto it, knowing what waited underneath. You move back toward the bank, past the souvenir booths and the scorched marks where fires have eaten through the top layer of ice. As you reach the edge, you look back one more time. The lights twinkle, the laughter rises, the frost settles into your eyelashes like lace. It's winter in Victorian London, and this river has become a stage. You step off the ice with the legs that feel slightly less trustworthy than before, your boots clacking awkwardly on the stone steps as you ascend back into the city proper. The sound of the frost fair fades behind you, still echoing faintly, with music and shouts, but now it's muffled again by the walls and fog and the hush of the evening drawing in. London is slipping into night, and the air sharpens. You pull your coat tighter and head uphill, into quieter streets where the houses grow larger and the street lamps more evenly spaced. It's time to see how the other half spends their winter evenings. You arrive outside one of the taller townhouses, tall, narrow, and perfectly symmetrical, his windows glowing amber behind frosted glass. The steps are freshly swept, a neat trail of coal dust trickling down one side from the boot scraper. Someone's lit a small lantern by the door, purely aesthetic because this household doesn't need to signal its warmth. It's already obvious. Inside, the change is immediate. You're greeted with heat, real, enveloping warmth that comes not just from one scrawny fire, but from multiple coal-burning grates spread across every room you pass. The walls are lined with wallpaper in warm colours, rich golds, soft reds, though a few corners peeled just slightly from winter damp. The hall smells faintly of lavender and pipe smoke. Upstairs, muffled laughter echoes, soft and melodic, like the house is laughing with you, or at you, it's hard to tell. A maid takes your coat. Her hands are red from the cold, but she moves with practiced efficiency. You catch a glimpse of the kitchen as you pass, busy, steaming, full of clattering pans and shouted instructions. There's a roast on the go, judging by the smell, and some sort of pudding bubbling in a pot the size of a cauldron. You're not staying for dinner, though. You're here for the parlour. The drawing room is already occupied. You step into a cloud of candlelight and gas lamp glow, warm enough to make you blink. The fireplace crackles under a marble mantelpiece adorned with holly and red ribbon. The guests, about a dozen of them, are draped elegantly across armchairs and fainting couches, hands clasped around teacups or tiny glasses of sherry. Their clothing speaks of wealth, but also winter. Brocade waistcoats, lace collars, layered skirts and petticoats that rustle when someone leans too far to refill a plate of scones. This isn't a party, it's not even really a gathering. It's a ritual parlour time. The post-dinner hours when conversation blooms, fingers warm against porcelain, and the outside world is safely shut away. It's gossip and performance, laughter and comparison, all under the guise of civility. You take a seat on a chair with feet shaped like lion paws and try not to sink too far in. A woman across the room is telling a story about her coach, nearly tipping in the snow. "Simply dreadful," she says, shaking her head with just enough drama to rattle her earrings. "The wheel caught on ice, and the poor driver looked like he might faint dead away. I told him, 'Pull yourself together, man, you're not a chimney sweep.'" The room laughs. She's not cruel exactly, just bored, and it's not like anyone here has ever been cold in a meaningful way. On the side table are piles of recent papers and magazines. You recognise the names, the Illustrated London News, Punch, a few imported French fashion prints. One man thumbs through them, grunting at the latest cartoons. "They've made Victoria look like a gingerbread woman again," he says, passing it to his neighbour. "And Albert's face, honestly, is criminal." The hostess moves through the room like she owns the air. Her gown is soft velvet, deep green, trimmed in ivory lace. Her hair's been pinned up in curls that probably took someone 2 hours to manage. She's warm, yes, but more importantly, she's interested in being seen as warm. She refills glasses and offers remarks, all tinged with just enough wit to be considered clever, and not quite enough bite to draw blood. Let's pause and appreciate this. For many in the Victorian middle and upper classes, the winter evening parlour was the heart of the home. It was where reputations were made, where subtle courtships unfolded, where secrets slipped out like steam from a kettle. The lighting mattered, gas lamps and candles arranged for flattering shadows. The seating mattered. No one sat too far from the fire unless they were being snubbed. The order mattered. Tea first, then spirits, then music or games. Maybe charades if things got rowdy. A historical note worth tucking into your pocket. The invention of the gas lamp transformed Victorian social life. Before its widespread use, people relied on oil lamps and candles, which were dim, messy, and expensive. Gaslight made it possible to stay up longer, to host guests without squinting, and to make every wrinkle and flush a little more visible. Of course, it also gave off carbon monoxide and occasionally exploded. But hey, ambience, now a slightly eerie detail. Many families kept mirrors covered during the darkest winter months, especially after a death in the home. It was partly superstition, mirrors were seen as portals, but also practicality. Dim, flickering rooms didn't need extra reflections of tired, pale faces. But in parlours like this one, mirrors gleamed, faces glowed. Shadows danced just enough to make everyone look alive. You sip something handed to you in a porcelain cup. Strong tea, probably Assam, sharpened enough to jolt your tongue. The cup has tiny painted violets around the rim, and a hairline crack near the base. It feels dainty in your hand, out of place against the heavy cold still clinging to your coat. You notice the warmth creeping back into your toes. This room is heated from multiple sources. You count 3 fireplaces, and then someone sits at the piano. A woman in a blue dress with rings on every finger, and a look that says she knows exactly how many eyes are on her. She plays something light, a waltz maybe, but slow, measured, elegant. The sound fills the room like a balm, washing over the guests in lazy waves. One couple hums along, another woman closes her eyes, the fire pops, and now the scholarly disagreement. Were these parlour evenings genuine social connections, or just theatre for the bored elite? Some argue that the drawing room was the last real space where women could dominate conversation, assert control, host power. Others claim it was just another cage, lace-lined, candle-lit, and padded with expectations. A stage set for manners and passive judgment. Probably, again, a bit of both. You lean back in your lion-foot chair and take it all in. The laughter, the warmth, the delicate social dance that unfolds in every glance and half-smile. It's beautiful, and also exhausting. You realise you've been holding your teacup too carefully, trying not to stain the embroidered tablecloth. Everyone's playing a part, even you. Outside, the fog thickens against the windows, blurring the glass like breath. The gas lamps flicker beyond, golden ghosts in the dark. But in here, the fire burns on, the piano plays, and not a single soul remembers how cold the world can be. Not tonight. The warmth of the drawing room lingers on your skin like a borrowed memory as you step back out into the street. The heavy door clicks shut behind you, muffling the laughter and music, sealing it away like it was never real. Out here, everything is dim again, fog clinging low, breath curling from your mouth like ghosts, and through that thick winter quiet, a sound cuts across the air. A voice, then another, and another, loud, melodic, not shouting exactly, calling. You follow the sound around the corner, deeper into the heart of the city, and there they are, street vendors, traders, hawkers, peddlers, the unsung symphony of Victorian London, each with a cry fine-tuned by years of repetition and the need to be heard over traffic, children and other louder sellers. Their voices rise and fall in a kind of call-and-response rhythm that bounces off brick and window pane, through alleyways and over the soot-slick rooftops. Hot pies, 2 for a penny, still warmer. Rags and bones. Rags and bones? Muffins here, muffins fresh. Eels, fat fresh eels, slippery as the devil. Each cry is unique, shaped by accent, personality, desperation, and craft. A good street crier can be recognised by voice alone. You pass a girl no older than 8, barefoot despite the frost, balancing a basket of matches and shouting in a tone that somehow sounds both cheerful and hollow. "Matches, missus. 6 for a halfpenny, dry and ready, I swear it." She catches your eye and smiles too wide, her teeth a pale contrast against her dirt-smudged cheeks. You nod, but keep walking. Another man pushes a cart of roasted potatoes, steam rising in aromatic curls. His cry is deeper, slower, with a rhythm that suggests he's been at this for hours already. "Taters hot, taters sweet, straight from the fire, warm your hands, warm your feet." He jingles a small bell at the end of each pass. A few children follow the cart like ducklings, hoping for dropped skins or a mercy spud. Here's the thing, the Victorian street cry was more than just noise. It was identity. In a city of millions where most people couldn't read and signs were often pointless, a voice was your brand. You didn't just say what you sold, you performed it. Crying coal wasn't enough. You needed volume, you needed flair, you needed lungs like church organs. Historical fact incoming. In 1851, Henry Mayhew documented dozens of these street cries in his sprawling survey of London's working classes. He recorded not just what people sold, but how they sold it. transcribing accents, noting rhythms, even describing the exact pitch of their voices. Some of these vendors had been crying the same phrases for decades. A few passed their cries down like family heirlooms. Now, something weird and wonderful, certain cries became so iconic they were turned into songs and stage performances. There were even early wax cylinder recordings made in the 1890s, preserving the sound of a muffin man for posterity. Imagine that. Voices echoing through time, calling out for business in a city they never lived to see change. You cross a small bridge now, the planks slick beneath your feet, and the sounds shift. You hear the unmistakable wheeze of an organ grinder. The music is thin, reedy, mournful, and merry at once. He stands near a lamppost, cranking steadily, his fingers blue around the handle. At his feet, a small monkey in a waistcoat dances awkwardly, its breath misting as it jerks side to side. A hat lies open in front of them, barely filled. A few coins, a chestnut, a single button. The man nods at you as you pass, and you realize something. No one's just selling out here. They're surviving. This is winter on the edge. Not the kind softened by firelight and tea, but the kind padded with wool scraps and pipe dreams. The kind where your voice is your only asset, and when it fails, so might everything else. Scholars still debate how much these cries truly penetrated the daily life of wealthier Victorians. Some claim the upper classes barely noticed them, treating them like city noise, an unavoidable hum. Others argue that cries shaped how neighbourhoods were remembered, defined even the rhythm of daily life. A certain fish seller's call might become iconic on one street, hated on another. The soundscape of London was patchwork, lived in, layered. You pass a man selling roasted chestnuts from a makeshift stove mounted to a pram frame. He's missing a few fingers, and his face is scarred, maybe from factory work, maybe from frostbite. His cry is almost whispered. Hot nuts. Sweet, warm nuts. It's less a sales pitch and more a lullaby. The smoke from his brazier mixes with the fog, creating a halo of comfort around him. You buy a small cone of chestnuts, mostly to warm your hands. They're charred, a little bitter, but they thaw your fingers and fill your mouth with smoke and memory. Around you the city groans, carriages rattle, footsteps echo, somewhere a bell chimes 6. The air grows colder, but the cries don't stop. Lavender water, sweet for your linens, penny a splash. Candles fresh, no drip, no smoke, best wax in London. Knives sharpened while you wait, cut in cold steel. Turnips, big as your fist, grown proper and clean, and one man simply shouting, anything for a penny, over and over, as if the offer alone might summon customers. You follow the sounds through the market streets, past frozen carts and crooked stalls, slipping between figures bundled tight and shadows moving fast. Somewhere a man is singing off-key but boldly, and the tune wraps around the calls like a scarf. The city may be freezing, but its voice remains loud. And then, unexpectedly, you hear silence. Not total, but a sudden drop, like a breath being held. You pause. Even the fog seems still. A woman passes, her basket of dried flowers swaying at her hip, her steps slow. No cry, just movement. It's not the absence of noise that chills you, it's the fact that you'd gotten used to it. The rhythm, the song, the living, breathing soundscape of winter commerce. You stop to listen one last time. The fog carries the words faintly, blending them into music. Coal, love, coal for the fire, cheap, warm, honest coal. And then it's gone. You follow the sound of hissing steam and distant wheels into a part of the city that feels louder somehow, denser, even beneath the fog. The buildings are broader here, hung with soot and streaked with moisture, and the very cobblestones vibrate with energy just under the surface. You're nearing a railway terminal, not the polite, polished kind used by the upper crust, but the working side of the Victorian rail, the part of town where everything smells like coal smoke, sweat and iron. As you round the corner, the station looms in front of you, brick, blackened, arched like a mouth that swallows thousands each day. And tonight, it's wide open. The gas lamps out front flicker through the mist, halos of light strung in a row, glowing dimly against the damp. The iron gates squeal as someone pushes through them ahead of you, a man with a hunched back and a sack slung over his shoulder, boots caked in mud. ticket clutched tightly like he's afraid someone might steal it. The smell hits you first. Hot metal, scorched oil, and that distinct scent of coal steam puffing from a dozen engines. It mixes with the city's fog to create something heavier, like walking through warm chimney smoke. You step inside the terminal and are immediately swallowed by sound. Wheels on rails, voices shouting, the clink of coins, the echo of a whistle cutting through the air like a blade. Everything's in motion, but nothing moves quickly. It's all clogged with bodies, cases, crates, and tension. The platform is crowded with passengers, families huddled together, travellers slumped on the benches, workers sprawled on sacks of flour or coal as they wait. The ceiling arches high above you, ribs of iron holding up streaked glass that leaks in the rain. Smoke coils up to meet it, never quite escaping. This isn't just a train station, it's a factory of movement, and tonight it's thick with humanity. You weave your way toward a third-class carriage, one of the wooden beasts with hard benches and frost on the windows. A man pulls the door open for his wife and she ducks inside, her skirts brushing over your boots. Inside it's dim, unheated, and already crowded. The air smells of damp wool and boiled potatoes. Still, people look relieved to be out of the wind. Let's pause on this. Third-class travel in Victorian England was brutally honest, no cushions, no heat. You were lucky to have glass in the windows, but it was affordable, just, and it meant even the working poor could move from city to city, or from village to job site. It was a small revolution in mobility, but a cold one. Winter travel in these compartments was brutal. You sat shoulder to shoulder, sharing body heat and sometimes tea if someone had enough to spare. You step up and into the carriage, taking a seat between a man with a dented kettle and a woman nursing a baby under 3 shawls. Her eyes are red with exhaustion, and she nods at you without really seeing. The man leans forward, elbows on knees, face lost behind a damp scarf. Everyone here is quiet. No small talk, just the sounds of breathing and the occasional cough. The engine lets out a low growl. Outside, the conductor's voice cracks through the noise. Train to Luton, 5 past, last call. Then a whistle, sharp and startling, and with a shudder the train lurches forward. The motion is uneven, juddering and clanking, but its movement all the same. The windows rattle in their frames. Cold air seeps in from every crevice. You watch the city slide by, streetlights glowing like candles behind curtains of smoke. For a moment you glimpse the Thames again, wide and still faintly iced over. Then it's gone, swallowed by warehouses and tenements and soot-dark tunnels. Here's your historical anchor. By the mid-1800s, the rail network in England had exploded. What began as short industrial lines turned into a web of steel connecting nearly every town. It meant people could move for work, families could reconnect, and even the poor could travel, though not always with dignity. The trains became lifelines, but also pressure cookers. Especially in winter, when delays were common, compartments were packed, and warmth was only ever partial. Now for something strange and oddly poetic. Some Victorian travellers carried baked potatoes in their coat pockets, not to eat, but to warm their hands. They'd buy them from vendors before boarding, tuck them in like living embers, and when the train was dark and frigid, hold them close. Eventually, of course, they'd eat them. But until then, they were portable heaters. No one talks about pocket potatoes anymore. Shame, really. Genius move. You lean back against the hard wooden seat, shoulders stiff. The woman beside you has begun to hum to her baby, a sound so low it blends with the creaking of the carriage. You close your eyes for a moment, not to sleep, but to imagine what this must feel like if you've been walking the streets all day, or working at the docks, or running errands for a master who doesn't know what frostbite looks like. The train slows, not a full stop, just a long exhale of steam and brakes. Someone gets off. Someone else gets on, bringing another gust of cold with them. The man with the kettle mutters under his breath and shifts in his seat. No one makes eye contact. It's too cold for pleasantries. You ride in silence. Now, historians love to debate whether third-class travel democratized mobility or simply extended the reach of poverty. Some claim it opened doors for the working class. Others argue it trapped them in new cycles, longer commutes to just as grueling jobs with barely more pay. Still, there's no denying this. It changed everything. You didn't need a horse or a coach or a favour, just a few coins, a destination, and the ability to endure discomfort. As the train rattles into another station, the baby starts to cry. a thin, exhausted wail that cuts through the cold like a match in the dark. The mother rocks gently, murmuring nonsense, her face half hidden in the folds of her scarf. A boy across the aisle offers her a bit of bread from his coat pocket. She accepts it with a nod, and for a moment the carriage feels almost warm again. The train shudders once more, then comes the final whistle. One more deep breath of smoke and steam, and it's off again. Heading out into the night, out toward towns wrapped in frost, out past cities where the fires never go out. Everyone bundled, everyone tired, everyone just trying to get somewhere slightly warmer than where they've been. And so you ride, rocked by the rhythm of steel on steel, thinking of all the people who once did the same, carrying potatoes and hopes and the chill of the city still clinging to their bones. The train slows again, groaning like it's tired of dragging this many people through the cold. You disembark with the rest of the weary crowd, stepping down onto a platform slick with ice. A station master in a stiff wool coat and a moustache that could survive a hurricane directs foot traffic with a gloved hand, and a face like he's allergic to questions. You don't ask anything. You just move along, shoulders hunched, steam rising from the engine behind you like some mechanical beast exhaling the weight of the city. Outside the station, the wind hits you immediately, sharp, damp, and full of other people's smoke. The streets here are quieter, narrower, but darker too. Fewer gas lamps, fewer friendly faces, and as you walk, boots crunching over the half-frozen grit that passes for pavement, you hear it. A low squeak, then a sharp clack, then vishents, and then as it repeats. A rhythm, not footsteps, not wheels, something in between. You turn into a narrow lane, and there he is, the rat catcher. You almost don't see him at first, just a shadow moving in the gloom, hunched over, dragging a cart behind him. The cart is wooden, its wheels uneven, and from it dangle cages, some empty, some not. The full ones rattle softly. You hear squeaks. A tail flicks between the slats. The man wears a long coat made of several other coats, stitched together in a way that makes it unclear where the fabric ends and the man begins. A sack hangs from his shoulder. One glove is missing. He's muttering to himself, something about the smart ones being quick, and doesn't notice you until you're almost beside him. He startles, then laughs. "Didn't hear you, did I?" he wheezes, revealing more gaps than teeth. "Sneaky, like a rat. You do well in the sewers." You don't take it as a compliment, but you do follow him as he rounds the corner and ducks into a side alleyway that, judging by the smell, hasn't seen sunlight or soap since Napoleon was in power. He unlatches a rusted gate, drags the cart through, and lifts a trap door with the kind of grunt that suggests he's done this more times than he'd like to admit. What you're about to do, in case you're wondering, is accompany a man into the Victorian sewer system. Don't panic. Well, maybe a little. It's technically a job shadow. The man you're following is part of a long and grimy line of workers whose job is not just to catch rats, but to keep the underbelly of the city from becoming too alive. Especially in winter, when rats scramble for warmth, food and dry nesting space, usually in basements and kitchens that already barely feed the humans living there. Down the iron ladder you go, your boots slippery on the rungs, the air thick with damp, old earth, and the unmistakable tang of, well, everything that shouldn't be here. The tunnel below is narrow, arched in brick, with black water trickling down one side. It's not entirely dark. There's a lantern swinging from the rat catcher's cart, casting a yellow glow on the walls. The shadows ripple like they've got their own ideas. And the smell? You've smelled better things inside of Jou's. You follow as he pushes deeper, muttering about nests and telling you, without turning around, that he once caught 20 in a single pipe. Not babies either. Big ones. As long as your forearm, I swear it. He stops abruptly, kneels beside a wall, and begins poking something metal into a hole. A minute later, there's a scuffle, a squeal, then silence. He grins, lifts the trap, and deposits a limp grey body into a leather sack. One down. Here's your historical fact for the evening. Rats were everywhere in Victorian London. In the sewers, yes, but also in shops, homes, carriages, anywhere warm with a scrap of food. While they didn't cause the plague, as once believed, they were still very efficient carriers of disease, and their bites, droppings, and sheer presence made life miserable. Rat catchers were vital. They used traps, poison, smoke, and sometimes even dogs or ferrets to flush out the vermin. It was considered skilled work, disgusting, yes, but respected in a strange way. You could make a living at it, if you didn't mind losing a few fingers. And now for the bizarre. Rat catchers sometimes sold their live catches to rat pits. Yes, that's exactly what it sounds like. Public entertainment where rats were released into an arena to be killed by trained terriers, timed and wagered upon by a rowdy, cheering crowd. It was as much blood sport as it was pest control. Victorian society had no shortage of strange ways to pass a winter's night. You're brought out of your thoughts by a splash. The rat catcher's foot slipped and he curses, slapping the wall with his free hand. The lantern swings wildly. You both freeze. Silence. Then another sound. Skittering. Dozens of tiny claws on brick. A rush of movement ahead. Then gone. You don't ask what that was. You're not sure you want to know. There's scholarly debate, if you're interested, about whether the rat population of Victorian London was truly as massive as claimed, or if public health fears exaggerated the numbers. Some argue that the rodents were symbolic scapegoats for larger sanitation failures. Others point to diaries, job records and infestation reports that suggest, yes, there were more rats than street lamps. It was an infestation with legs, teeth and no particular regard for social class. You walk for another 20 minutes in that dank, echoing half-dark before the rat catcher decides he's done for the night. He's caught 7, respectable apparently, and only lost 1 trap. He seems pleased. You climb the ladder back into the open air, grateful to smell coal smoke again. Outside the fog seems cleaner than before. Or maybe it's just that your nose is numb. The rat catcher tips his cap to you, his face etched with grime and years, and disappears into the mist with his cart of caged corpses and stories. A bell tolls the hour. 7, evening proper. You exhale into your scarf and look down the street. Somewhere people are dressing for theatre, somewhere soup is boiling, somewhere a child is selling matches in the dark, and somewhere under your feet the rats are still running. Your boots feel heavier after the sewers, not just wet, heavier, like they're filled with more than water. The grime follows you, invisible but clinging, and the air outside suddenly smells less like fog and more like freedom. You breathe deep and try not to think about the squelch from your left sock. Your next stop is uphill, literally and socially. You're heading toward the brighter lights of the West End, where winter doesn't mean hunger and rats, but opera cloaks, horse-drawn carriages and velvet seats warmed by gas chandeliers. You're going to the theatre. London's playhouses are alive tonight, their facades lit up like they're trying to compete with the stars. A few manage. Outside the grand entrance to Drury Lane, a line of carriages waits in orderly chaos. Horses stamp their hooves in the cold, steam rising from their flanks, while footmen flick away snowflakes from their masters' shoulders. Ladies descend with gloved hands tucked into the crooks of well-dressed arms. Laughter rises with the wind. Perfume fights the smell of manure. Everyone's pretending it isn't freezing. You take the long route past the side of the building, avoiding the crush of the main entrance. You catch a glimpse through a window. Velvet drapes, gold-gilded frames, flickers of candlelight in mirrored sconces. Everything glows. And inside those walls, the chill of the city vanishes completely, transformed by music, costumes, and the very Victorian gift for distraction. Backstage, though, it's another world. You slip through a narrow alley, past the loading entrance where stagehands hustle crates of props and bundles of costumes like they're late for a ship. The air is warm here too, but it's the warmth of sweat and urgency. Someone yells for a missing hat, another person's gluing on a moustache, a third is throwing up into a bucket before opening night. Theatre is magic, sure, but it's also chaos with rouge and a deadline. Tonight's performance is a melodrama, naturally. This is what Victorian crowds crave. Heroes in crisp waistcoats, villains with eyebrows like furniture legs, and heroines who faint with practiced grace. You find your way inside and sneak into the upper circle, what they call the gods. The cheap seats where the view is distant, the seats are cold and the crowd is loud, and you wouldn't want to be anywhere else. From here you can see everything. The plush sea of better-dressed patrons below, the royal boxes glinting with brooches and monocles, and the massive velvet curtain waiting to be lifted. The air is thick with perfume, powder and damp wool, the whisper of programmes, the occasional cough. Then the gaslights dim and the crowd leans forward like a single organism. The curtain rises, and for the next 2 hours the cold outside doesn't exist. The hero enters, broad-shouldered, noble, clearly too good for this world. The villain lurks in the shadows, practically twirling his moustache. The heroine sings, the chorus dances, the sets wobble if you look too closely, but no one cares. It's spectacle, it's escape, it's a furnace for the imagination. Here's your historical moment. By the mid-19th century, London's theatre scene was booming. With gaslighting, larger venues, and a growing middle class hungry for culture, performances became major winter attractions. Even the working poor could sometimes afford gallery tickets. It wasn't just art, it was as warmth, light, and a place to sit down for a few hours where no one asked what you did for a living. There's a strange side to this too. Gaslighting in theatres was both a blessing and a hazard. Sure, it made everything brighter, but it also raised temperatures to near unbearable levels in the lower boxes, where the rich roasted in their layers of silk and brocade, and it caused fires, so many fires. Entire theatres went up in minutes when a curtain brushed the flame or a set piece caught a rogue spark. But still they kept coming, kept building bigger, kept lighting the lamps. You notice a boy in the seat beside you, barefoot, nose running, grinning like he's just watched God descend from the ceiling. He's mouthing the hero's lines beat for beat. He's seen this one before, maybe a dozen times. He clutches a crust of bread in one hand and a paper hat in the other. No one's asking him for a ticket. No one's asking at all. The scholars argue about this too. Some say the theatre was a place of rare equality, where class lines blurred and everyone became part of the same shared fantasy. Others point out that seating was strictly divided, pricing kept the poorest out of reach of the good performances, and access wasn't as democratic as the stories suggest. Still, those gallery seats, cold and noisy, meant the difference between a night alone on the street and a few hours inside a world built entirely from paint and song. Back on stage, the villain has been exposed. There's a sword fight, awkward but earnest, and the audience cheers. The heroine is saved, the hero redeems his honour. And everyone sings a final verse. You don't understand half the words, but you feel it. The warmth that spreads when a room full of strangers forgets how miserable the outside is. Then the curtain falls, and reality filters back in. The crowd applauds, rises, and begins to shuffle out. You exit with them, shoulder to shoulder, with people whose gloves cost more than your rent. A woman behind you complains about the damp. A man sneezes into a silk handkerchief and hands it to his valet without blinking. A pair of boys try to mimic the fencing scene, tripping over their own scarves. The cold doesn't hit until you're outside. It's darker now, colder too. The fog has thickened, and the gas lamps sputter under its weight. You watch a carriage pull away from the curb, its lanterns glowing, wheels crunching over frost. A couple lingers under a street lamp, whispering something private. A costumed actor bursts out of the side door with his coat flapping, chasing a woman laughing too hard to be proper. Theatre isn't real, you remind yourself. It's masks and lines and painted floors. But tonight it was everything. A moment of light in a city of cold, and in this winter world, that counts for more than you'd think. You turn away from the theatre, your breath fogging the air in soft puffs as you walk. The magic of the performance still clings to your coat like the last trace of perfume. Elegant, fleeting. But as the music and applause fade behind you, so does the warmth. The West End's golden glow is replaced by the deeper gloom of London's less polished corners. Your route takes you east toward the shadows of the city's underbelly, where the pavement changes from swept stone to broken cobbles, and the air is less theatrical mist and more coal soot and old cabbage. You're headed to a place people don't visit unless they have to, the workhouse, or rather, outside of it. It stands like a brick monument to the idea of punishment by necessity. Tall, grey stone with no sign, no flourish, and no pretense of welcome. Just a set of heavy gates, a narrow doorway, and a small queue of desperate figures pressing in against the cold. You hear the murmur of voices, the occasional cough, and a child's soft sob behind a mother's coat. The sign above the entrance says nothing, but everyone here knows what this building is and what it isn't. You take your place in the back of the line, not to enter, just to watch. Your coat is too clean, your boots too dry, but still no one looks twice at you. Misery levels everything. A woman in front of you clutches a sleeping baby wrapped in a shawl that's more whole than wool. A man behind you keeps muttering, rubbing his hands together, like if he stops for 1 second, he'll freeze where he stands. Then the door opens, just a crack, and a voice, dry, clipped, official, calls, "We've room for 2 tonight." 2 out of a line of at least 20. You feel the shift instantly, like a gust of wind without movement. The front of the line tightens. The woman with the baby doesn't even look up. A boy, no more than 12, darts forward, then a woman with wild eyes and bare hands. The rest sag in place, no protests, no outrage, just silent resignation. The door closes again. The rest are left outside. The poor law was supposed to protect the vulnerable. That was the sales pitch, anyway. Introduced in the early 1800s and reformed in 1834, it was meant to provide relief for the poor, basic shelter, food and clothing. But in reality, it functioned more as a deterrent. If you were desperate enough to enter the workhouse, the thinking went, you'd have to give up everything. Your home, your possessions, even your family. Husbands and wives were separated. Children taken from parents. The logic was cruel and deliberate. No one should want to be here. And in winter, when the streets froze and soup kitchens ran dry, people wanted in anyway. You walk slowly along the side of the building, following the iron fence. Through one high window you see a flicker of movement, someone mopping a floor. In another, the shadow of someone hunched at a table. You hear nothing. Workhouses weren't known for their volume. Inside, voices were quiet. Rules were strict. Beds were hard and food well, calling it food was generous. Here's your historical anchor. The daily diet in a Victorian workhouse was meant to be just enough to prevent starvation, and no more. Gruel, bread, maybe a potato, meat if you were lucky or dying. Most meals were cold, served on metal plates, eaten in silence. Discipline was enforced with routine, punishment and tedium. You weren't meant to get comfortable, you were meant to regret needing it. But here's a disturbing fringe detail. Many workhouses ran their own infirmaries, and these became, in essence, de facto hospitals for the destitute. Problem was, they weren't staffed like hospitals. In some places, children were tasked with carrying chamber pots between dying patients. Basic medical care was minimal, soap was scarce, contagion was routine, and in winter, when immune systems weakened and illness spread like fire in dry grass, the infirmaries overflowed. If you entered sick, your chances of leaving were grim. You pause now at the rear gate where deliveries come in, sacks of flour, barrels of salted meat, stacks of firewood. A man is unloading a cart while a worker from inside checks items off a list. The worker has the same drawn grey look as the people outside. He just wears a slightly better coat. You watch the two exchange barely a word before the gate clangs shut again. And here's the ongoing debate among scholars. Did workhouses actually protect the poor during winter, or simply institutionalize suffering in a new bureaucratic form? Some argue that without them, thousands more would have died. Others say they were prisons in all but name, designed to dehumanize rather than support. Both sides agree on one thing: no one entered the workhouse willingly. You had to be broken first. You double back toward the front of the building. The line is gone now, dispersed like breath in the cold. One man has slumped against the wall, asleep or passed out. Another is limping down the street with no apparent direction. A pair of children are digging through a nearby rubbish pile for anything worth burning. And in that moment, a memory surfaces. A line from a local newspaper you read once. Better to starve outside the workhouse walls than rot within them. It was meant to be dramatic, but you understand it now. The cold at least doesn't shame you. You pass the front gates again and notice something carved into the stone arch. 1841. Nothing else, no ornamentation, no sentiment, just a date. You run your fingers over it, feel the grooves cut by time and frost, and try to imagine the thousands who passed under it since then. Some entered for a night, some never left. The snow begins to fall again, this time soft and slow, like the city's trying to cover the worst of itself. You watch it gather in the crevices of the brick, on the edges of the iron railings, on the shoulders of statues whose faces have eroded to anonymity. The city doesn't apologize for its workhouses, it just builds around them. You walk away, slowly, quietly. Behind you the door creaks open again, but this time no one answers. The snow falls a little thicker now, not in grand theatrical flakes, but in a steady, silencing drizzle of white that softens the sound of boots and mutes the shape of every building. London begins to blur at the edges. Lampposts become smudges of gold in the gloom. Chimneys dissolve into fog and footsteps are swallowed almost the instant they land. It's beautiful, in that peculiar way suffering often is from a distance. Up close, though, it's just cold. You make your way down a narrow alley where the snow hasn't yet reached the ground. The overhanging eaves, laundry lines, and smoke-blackened bricks act as a shield, keeping the flakes suspended above like a low ceiling. But the damp here is worse, heavy, close, like the walls are sweating. And in that alley, against a crumbling wall, crouched beneath a stack of broken crates and old wool sacks, is a child. She can't be more than 8, maybe 9 if you're generous. Her dress, if you can call it that, is thin cotton patched over again and again with whatever fabric was available. A sleeve from a man's shirt, a strip of curtain, one sock, no shoes. Her fingers are red and raw. You can see where the nails have cracked. She's got a small tin bowl beside her, empty except for 2 buttons and a copper coin so worn it looks more like a pebble than money. She sees you and straightens, not to run, she's too tired for that, but to sit up with what little pride she can muster. "Not begging," she says, "just sitting." Her voice is sharp but thin. No one wants to be pitied, especially not the ones who need it most. You crouch beside her, and she eyes you with suspicion. Children who live on the streets don't have the luxury of trust. She gestures vaguely toward the alley mouth. "Some bigger lads chased me off my spot," she mutters. "Said it was theirs because they had a dog. Dog's got one ear and a limp. Didn't even bark proper." She shrugs, as if this is all fair enough. This child, like too many others in Victorian London, is one of the waifs and strays, a category so common it became an official term in the charitable circles. Thousands of children lived on the streets, especially in winter, when overcrowded lodging houses turned them away, or when even the most distant relatives finally said, "No more." Some were orphans, others had families who simply couldn't afford another mouth. Some had been sent to run errands and never found their way back, and many, like this girl, just fell through. You offer her your scarf. She shakes her head. "You'll catch your death." You blink. It takes you a moment to realise she's worried about you. You smile, but she doesn't return it. A nearby door creaks open and a woman leans out, middle-aged, face wrapped in a shawl, eyes scanning the alley. "Mary," she hisses. The girl flinches. "There you are. Come in now, you daft thing." Mary doesn't move. "They'll let you have the box room floor if you stay quiet. Don't go causing fuss." The girl hesitates, then grabs her tin and scrambles up. "Thanks," she mutters, not to the woman, but to you, and disappears through the doorway without another word. The door slams shut again. The alley is quiet. Here's your grim historical footnote. Frostbite and chilblains were common among street children, especially those without gloves or shoes. Fingers turned purple, toes blackened, skin cracked open and bled, children froze in doorways, died on park benches, and those who survived often did so by stealing, lying, or attaching themselves to gangs that offered a scrap of bread in exchange for unquestioning loyalty. Some street kids sold matches, some flowers, others bits of soap or shoe-shining services. A few were lucky enough to get into orphanages or charity schools, places like Dr. Bernardo's Homes, founded specifically to rescue children from street life. But the waiting lists were long and the rules were strict, and winter didn't wait. You pass another alley and spot 2 boys huddled beside a bakery vent, steam rising from their hunched shoulders. They're both wrapped in what looks like curtain fabric. One has a tin of something sticky, maybe treacle, and the other is licking his finger for another taste. They nod at you like they're part of some invisible club and then disappear back into the shadows. A few years from now, they'll either be chimney sweeps, pickpockets, or in prison. Or worse, you move on, heart a little heavier, feet a little slower. The snow has crept down into your collar, soaking your scarf. The city's quiet now, the kind of quiet that feels more like absence than peace. A small form darts across your path. Another child, this one older, in a boy's cap and trousers too big for her frame. She's fast, skilled. She dips into a pocket, swipes something, and is gone before the man she bumped into realizes anything is missing. She disappears into the fog, blending with it, vanishing like she was never there. The line between survival and crime was paper thin in this world. Pickpockets were common, some trained from the age of 5. Others ran with the so-called child gangs of London, loosely organised groups that stole to eat and slept where they could. Dickens didn't invent the Artful Dodger, he just wrote him down. Some historians argue that Victorian society was more sympathetic to poor children than their adults, that charities and the public were more likely to give food or coins to a child than a grown man. Others point out that these same children were often punished harshly, sent to prison hulks, reform schools, or shipped off to the colonies for the crime of trying to survive. The truth is that they were ignored until they became a nuisance. Then they were punished, then forgotten. You reach the end of the street, where a small fire burns in a metal barrel. Around it huddle 5 or 6 children, none older than 12. They take turns holding their hands out to the flames. One has wrapped her feet in rags. Another has newspaper stuffed into his shirt. They're talking softly, voices hoarse from cold. One of them coughs, a hacking, wet sound that shouldn't belong to someone so small. They don't notice you, or they do and just don't care. You're another shadow, another shape in the fog. You watch them for a moment, then step away, leaving them to their stolen heat. A little farther on, you pass a sign nailed to a post. Lost boy, age 11, Hax, Thomas, brown hair, grey cap, last seen near Covent Garden. Below it another, reward, and another. Have you seen Mary? You pause, look back toward the alley you left, wonder if anyone's still looking for her. The snow continues to fall quiet and steady. The firelight from the children's barrel flickers dimly behind you as you press deeper into the night, back into streets where the gas lamps flicker like old memories and the buildings lean in on each other like tired friends trying to stay upright. The fog drapes low, not so much a weather pattern now as a mood, settling into your clothes, your lungs, even your bones. It's not just nightfall, it's full winter, wrapped around the city like a second skin, and somewhere in the thick of it, you catch a faint, rhythmic sound. The clank of metal on stone, followed by a soft jingle. Then the glow of a lantern swinging gently in the dark. You step off the main road, down a smaller lane, and there he is, walking slowly, deliberately, as though he's not just moving but marking time, the night watchman. He's not a policeman. Not really, not anymore. By the mid-Victorian era, formal policing had begun to take over the streets, and the old night watch was largely ceremonial. But in neighbourhoods too poor or too forgotten to merit real protection, you'd still find these solitary figures, keys at their belts, clubs in their hands, and heavy lanterns carving little ovals of light through the dark. He wears a thick woolen coat belted tight at the waist, boots crusted with dried mud, and a scarf wrapped high enough that only his eyes are visible. His lantern swings from a hooked pole, casting golden arcs across the cobbles. In his other hand he carries a rattle, a strange, clacking wooden device meant to summon attention in an emergency. It sounds like something between a cricket and a clock falling down a staircase. He doesn't see you at first, or maybe he does and doesn't care. He stops at a door, checks the handle, then makes a mark in a little book. He's not watching for crime so much as watching for things to happen. Fires, floods, deaths. He's a human alarm system. He starts walking again, and you fall into step behind him, careful not to draw too much attention. There's something oddly comforting in his pace, slow, steady, practiced. You pass shuttered shop fronts and windows frosted from the inside. A bootmaker's door is slightly ajar. The watchman stops, peers in, then raps the frame with his club. A groan from within. Door's open, he mutters. Not safe. A man appears from the gloom and closes it with a grunt. No thanks, no conversation, just the way things are. Night watchmen were often older men, former soldiers or factory workers too broken or slow for more physically demanding labour. The job required stamina, eyes that could pierce fog, and a tolerance for loneliness. Winter made it harder. Fewer people on the street meant fewer witnesses, more shadows, more chances to vanish into them. He stops again and checks his pocket watch. 8, he murmurs, mostly to himself. Then loudly to the air, all's well? His voice echoes up the narrow alleys like a prayer, or a dare. That was tradition, calling the hour, letting people know someone was awake while they slept. There's debate among historians about whether this served any real purpose, or was just a holdover from earlier centuries. Some say it comforted the public, others believe it just alerted criminals to the watchman's location, but it's hard to deny the poetry of it. A man, alone in the fog, speaking into the silence just to remind the city he's there. He rounds a corner and comes across a pile of rags in the gutter. Not rags, a man, or something close. The watchman kneels, nudges him gently with the end of his staff. No movement. Then a cough. Wet, rasping, alive. For now. The watchman straightens and sighs. Can't carry you, mate, he mutters. Not allowed. He pulls a bit of cloth from his coat and tucks it under the man's head. Then he walks on. Here's your historical detail. Night watchmen had no real authority. They weren't police, couldn't arrest anyone, and had no weapons beyond their rattles and sticks. Their job was presence, a physical reminder that someone was watching. Sometimes they carried lists of residents to make sure tenants hadn't died quietly in the night. Other times they were paid extra to deliver messages, guide drunkards home, or wake early workers by knocking on their shutters. And here's a peculiar side note. In some neighbourhoods, watchmen were known for singing, not songs but hourly chants, "Past 10 o'clock and a cold night, my friends." Little rhyming reports of time and weather, passed down from older men who'd done the same before them. Some added jokes, others quoted the Bible. It was a strange kind of public performance, one meant only for insomniacs and ghosts. The man in front of you doesn't sing, but as he walks, he talks, to himself mostly, muttering about slippery steps and wind from the north. You notice he checks every drain pipe as he passes. It takes a moment to realise why. In deep winter, frozen gutters burst and fall, sometimes killing anyone below. Another quiet hazard in a city full of them. You pass a row of tenements now, the kind where families crowd 5 to a room. You can hear muffled arguments behind the brick. Someone shouting about spilled coal, someone else coughing like it's been years. The watchman stops again, peers up at a second-story window where the glass is cracked. A small shape watches from behind the curtain. The figure raises a hand. The watchman tips his lantern. Then he moves on. There's debate among scholars about the usefulness of men like this. Half forgotten, underpaid, barely trained. Some argue they were ineffective and easily bribed. Others suggest they were essential glue, holding neighbourhoods together through familiarity and routine. The truth, as always, is likely a mix. They didn't stop revolutions, but they might have stopped a fire, or warned someone about a broken step, or noticed when the familiar figure in the alley didn't move anymore. You follow him to the end of his circuit. A small booth sits at the edge of the road. 3 walls, 1 stool, and a tiny coal brazier glowing like a dying heart. He steps inside, sets down his lantern, and stretches his stiff legs. He notices you now, really sees you, and smiles faintly. "Walk in late." You nod. He offers no warning, no judgment. Just shifts on the stool and pokes the coal with his stick. Sparks drift up and die in the fog. Then softly, as if to the night itself, "Still 3 hours till the change." You leave him there, his figure framed in orange light, the watchman who watches a city that barely sees him back. As you walk away, the rattle sounds again, sharp, hollow, strangely comforting, and behind it, faint and fading, all's well. You walk until your toes go numb again. It's strange how quickly the body forgets warmth out here, like your blood makes peace with the cold and simply decides to slow down. The wind has teeth now, and it nips at your face as you move along another dim, narrow street, past shuttered storefronts and crooked lampposts, but then something shifts. A scent in the air, sweet, rich, spice. It reaches you like a thread tugging at your memory, and suddenly there it is again. Light. Golden and flickering, spilling from frosted windows onto the snow-covered street, and for once, it's not a pub. It's a house, a home, and not just any home. You slow your pace as you come upon the tall, narrow house tucked between 2 shops. A modest brick townhouse, 2 stories high, but glowing like a lantern in the night. Through the large window you see a fire crackling in the hearth, the warm orange glow dancing across rugs, wallpaper, polished furniture. Someone's drawn the curtains back just enough to let the world peek in. Inside people are gathered, family, maybe a few friends. And from the mantel above the fire hang the unmistakable shapes of wreaths and garlands draped with holly, ivy, and the occasional orange slice dried and threaded with ribbon. It's Christmas Eve. You step closer, just enough to hear the muffled laughter from within. A young woman pours something from a kettle into a waiting cup. A boy, about 12, plays with a toy horse near the fire. An older gentleman, father or grandfather, leans back in a wide chair, pipe in hand, eyes nearly closed from the heat. And there, resting on a table under candlelight, lies a thick, round plum pudding, steaming, waiting, crowned with a sprig of holly. If you could somehow bottle the scene and heat it over a fire, you'd have a cure for frostbite. Victorian Christmases were more than just tradition. They were a project, a deliberate creation of comfort and festivity meant to fight back the bleakness of the season. And a lot of that had to do with a certain Charles Dickens, who took one look at the way Britain celebrated and said, in so many words, we can do better. He didn't invent Christmas, of course, but A Christmas Carol helped rebrand it as a time not just for religion, but for generosity, family, warmth, and ghostly moral lessons delivered with terrifying punctuality. Speaking of ghosts, this is the night for them, not Halloween, not Guy Fawkes. No, Christmas Eve was the traditional time for telling ghost stories in Victorian England. It makes a kind of sense, doesn't it? The longest nights, the deepest dark, the cold pressing against your windows while you sit around the fire and whisper about the shadows outside, and the ones inside too. It was a tradition well before Dickens, but he certainly gave it fuel. Ghosts became a part of the season, woven into its fabric just like holly and ribbon. You won't find them in carols, but they're there, lurking between the figgy pudding and the punch. Now, back to that pudding. Inside the house, the matron returns to the table with a small jug, the brandy. She pours it generously over the pudding, then steps back. Someone strikes a match. A moment later, blue flame rises from the surface, flickering like a tiny gas lamp in the shape of a dessert. The family claps politely. The boy shouts with delight. The fire burns for a few seconds, then dies, leaving behind the smell of singed alcohol and raisins. It's not just food, it's performance. And in the Victorian home, presentation was everything. Here's your historical footnote. Plum pudding, also known as Christmas pudding, was a dense, rich dessert filled with dried fruits, suet, flour, bread crumbs and spices, boiled or steamed for hours, sometimes days in advance. Many families made it a week before Christmas on what was called Stir-Up Sunday, each member of the household taking a turn to stir the batter and make a wish. Coins were sometimes hidden inside, and whoever found one in their slice would be granted luck, or at least bragging rights, until next year. You continue walking, away from the glowing windows, deeper into a neighbourhood of homes both festive and subdued. Some are dark, their residents already asleep or unable to afford candles for cheer. Others flicker faintly with warmth. A few display wreaths made of rags and scraps, poverty's version of decoration, where effort and hope are stitched into every twig. The streets are quieter here. Fewer voices, more snow. A little farther on, you pass a church, its bell tower coated in frost, the stained glass barely visible behind the condensation. You can hear singing from inside, soft, harmonious, drifting out into the night. A choir, not professionals, just townsfolk, gathered for midnight service. You pause near the door, the scent of pine and wax mingling with the snow. Inside they sing, "In the bleak midwinter." The irony is unintentional, but perfect. Christmas in Victorian England was as much about image as it was about reality. The ideal of the glowing hearth, the roast goose, the family gathered in harmony, it existed. But not for everyone. The poor scraped together what they could. Some churches and charities offered free meals, donated toys or baskets with coal and oranges. Others offered sermons and moral instruction, which were less useful when your chimney had no fire. Still, even in the darkest corners of the city, people found ways to celebrate. A bit of holly in the window, a candle burned longer than usual, a borrowed hymn hummed on a walk home from work, maybe a sweet stolen from a tray in someone else's parlour, or maybe just a ghost story told under a stairwell by candlelight with hands clasped tight and breath fogging in the air. And here's the debate. Did Dickens and his contemporaries truly bring joy to Christmas, or did they create a fantasy that made real poverty feel more visible and yet less solvable? Some scholars argue that the Victorian Christmas was more about comfort for the middle class than change for the poor. Others insist it fostered a new spirit of generosity. Maybe it did both. Or maybe, like the flame on the pudding, it burned bright for a moment, then faded back into hunger and frost. You walk on. A group of carolers passes you, young, red-cheeked, cloaked in scarves and singing, "God rest ye merry gentlemen," with more gusto than harmony. They nod at you, offer a smile and move on toward the next door. They won't knock on everyone. Some houses open, others won't. That's how the season works here. An offering. A chance. As midnight nears, you find yourself under a street lamp. Its glass fogged, its flame weak, but still burning. You close your eyes and listen. The singing, the laughter behind windows, the crackle of fires in other people's homes, and under it all the silence of the snow, falling in quiet defiance of the cold. It's Christmas Eve in Victorian London. You're alone but not untouched by warmth. Not tonight. The snow doesn't stop. It falls in a steady rhythm now, brushing rooftops and curling into doorways, catching in your eyelashes like soft sand. The city is quieter than it's been all night, as though even London has paused to take a breath. You walk slowly, the cold no longer shocking, but simply poignant and present. An uninvited guest that's made itself at home in your coat, your gloves, your bones. Every joint creaks, your throat scratches deep. Your nose is leaking in a way that is both undignified and unstoppable. So naturally you begin to think about illness. Not dramatic, literary illness. The slow, tragic cough of some corset-clad heroine fading into lace pillows. But the more familiar kind, the Victorian cold in all its snot-nosed, hacking glory. Because everyone gets sick in a London winter. And if you live here long enough, you start to realise just how many ways people have tried to cure it. You find yourself near a chemist's shop, its windows still lit even at this late hour. Inside, rows of glass bottles gleam under gaslight. Amber, green, cobalt blue, some are neatly labelled, tinctures, syrups, powders. Others are more mysterious. You step inside and the warm, acrid smell of menthol and camphor wraps around your face like a slap with a heated glove. Behind the counter, a man in spectacles is grinding something in a mortar with more vigour than seems necessary. He nods in greeting, doesn't stop grinding. You look around. The shelves are crowded with Victorian cold remedies, each more peculiar than the last. Horehound lozenges, licorice root, quinine powder, bottles of laudanum for the restless, vials of cocaine toothache drops, a jug labelled wormwood and peppermint recommended for the spleen. That one doesn't explain how, or what a spleen does, really. One box catches your eye. Dr. Holston's pneumo balm for the agitated lung. The label features a woman reclining gracefully, her hand on her chest, as if in the final act of an opera. You imagine her whispering, "Ah yes, thank heavens for the pneumo balm." You pick it up, give it a shake. The powder inside makes a dull, damp sound. You quietly put it back. Let's be clear. Most Victorian cold cures did very little. A few made you feel better temporarily. Opium tends to have that effect, but most were just sugar, alcohol, herbs, or raw guesswork. And yet people clung to them. Winter was relentless, and so were the coughs. A sniffle could become a wheeze, which could become consumption, which could become a funeral. You approach the counter as the chemist finally stops grinding. "Throat?" he asks, not looking up. You nod. He selects a small tin from the shelf behind him, opens it, and hands you something suck and sticky on a bit of wax paper. Licorice, eucalyptus, menthol, and opiate dust. Don't take more than 2. You thank him, though you're not sure for what, and step back outside with the lozenge already melting in your mouth. Tastes like a pine tree and regret, but at least you can breathe again. Here's a delightful oddity. One popular home remedy involved boiling onions in milk and drinking the result while wrapped in flannel. Another swore by a paste of mustard powder and vinegar applied to the chest. The burning sensation apparently a sign it was working. Others recommended bloodletting, inhaling turpentine, or wearing a red flannel around the throat to draw out the illness. And of course there was always the default cure-all, gin. You wander into a nearby tavern just long enough to thaw your eyebrows, and overhear a man swearing by his grandmother's tonic, equal parts honey, vinegar, lemon juice and whiskey. Cures a cold, he tells the barmaid, or at least makes you forget you had one. She hands him a steaming cup of something that smells suspiciously like hot brandy and cloves, and is the Victorian version of Dayquil. If Dayquil also came with a potential bar fight, and here comes the scholarly debate. How much of this Victorian obsession with self-medicating was due to genuine fear of illness, and how much was simply the only option available? Some historians argue that most people had little access to trained doctors and relied on folk wisdom passed down through families. Others point to the rise of patent medicines, those elaborately labelled concoctions sold without regulation, and argue that illness was commodified, turned into a business model where suffering was profitable, and hope came in a bottle with a Latin name. You exit the tavern into air that feels even colder now, your skin flushed with contrast. The lozenge has worn off. Your nose is still running. Somewhere nearby, a man is selling roasted chestnuts under a makeshift tarp. He looks half asleep, the smoke from his brazier swirling into the fog above. You buy a handful, not because you're hungry, but because the heat from the paper cone feels like life itself. As you eat, you pass a small group gathered under an awning, 3 women, 1 elderly man and a boy coughing hard enough to rattle the brick behind him. The women murmur about goose fat rubbed on the chest, about keeping socks near the fire overnight, about the new doctor on Bell Street who gives out pink salts that make you sleep for days. The old man just spits into the gutter and mutters, "Tea with hemlock if you've got the nerve. Ends the cold quick." Everyone laughs too hard at that. The boy keeps coughing. And here's something chilling. Many cold remedies in the Victorian era were, in hindsight, deeply dangerous. Arsenic was used in tonics, mercury appeared in salves. Chloroform was marketed as a cure for the common cold and sold over the counter. And laudanum, sweet, syrupy, and laced with opium, was so common it became part of nursery routines. Babies, women, factory workers, all sedated into silence. The line between cure and poison was blurry, sometimes non-existent. You finish your chestnuts and keep walking, your breath curling through the air like cigarette smoke. You realise that in a city this cold, even illness is a shared experience. Everyone coughs, everyone sniffles, everyone knows someone who didn't get better. You pass a woman in a shawl sitting on her stoop with a steaming mug cupped in both hands. She nods at you. "Clove and vinegar," she offers, lifting the mug. "Warms the throat and the soul." You smile and return the nod. The soul could use it. The snow thickens. You sneeze again. Louder this time. The kind of sneeze that echoes off bricks and makes an old man across the street glance up like he just heard the starting pistol for the apocalypse. He shakes his head and mutters something about bad air before disappearing into a doorway. And just like that, you're reminded that in Victorian London, winter didn't just bring cold, it brought stench. Oh yes, for all its foggy romance and candlelit charm, the city in winter could reek like a punch to the nose. You round a corner and are immediately met with it. That deep earthy scent of wet cobblestone, horse manure and burning coal, layered like an onion and baked into every stone. It wraps around you, rides the breeze, curls up under your scarf like a cat with boundary issues. It's not one smell, not exactly. It's many. The smell of the season, a city's breath. The first offender? Horses, everywhere. Clomping down side streets, parked outside shops, tethered near pubs, shaking their heads and snorting steam like angry dragons, their breath mists the air in long warm streams, which would be charming, if not for what follows immediately after. The steaming piles they leave behind. Massive, fresh, and incredibly prolific. A single horse could drop 25 pounds of manure per day, and in a city with thousands of them pulling carts, coaches, omnibuses, well, let's just say snow wasn't the only thing piling up. The streets glisten with a blend of slush, soot, and excrement that defies poetic description. You step carefully, like a soldier navigating a minefield. Some of the puddles are deceptively shallow. Others are bottomless portals to who knows where. The worst of it gathers near curbs where wagons have splashed it into blackened ridges. And as traffic passes, the slush gets flung into the air, onto coats, boots, and the occasional unlucky face. You pass a street sweeper now, one of the dozens paid to push carts and brooms through the muck. He's an older man, sleeves rolled up despite the cold, face red from the exertion. His broom slaps against the cobbles with a wet squelch that's more emotional than auditory. Beside him, a pile of refuse sits smoking in the snow, horse dung, coal ash, fish bones, bits of newspaper, and something vaguely cabbage-shaped. He glances at you and shrugs, as if to say, "We do what we can." Historically, this was one of the great ironies of Victorian urban life. Advances in industry made the city more modern, more connected, more busy, but they also made it dirtier. The cleaner your boots looked, the richer you probably were, because only the well-off could afford the carriage rides, private pavements, and upstairs lives that kept them above the stink. Everyone else? You walked through it. You lived in it. You wore it home. Next up, coal. The true scent of Victorian winter. The smell of survival. Every chimney in the city is puffing away now, sending black smoke into the fog like a million funeral processions. You pass under an arch where the soot is so thick it looks like the ceiling's been painted with mascara. The air tastes metallic, bitter. Your scarf does little to stop it, but you still press it over your mouth, hoping to trick your lungs into thinking you care. The coal smoke clings to everything. It stains brick, settles in hair, lines your nostrils with grit. It makes your eyes water. It's warm, yes, but it's a filthy warmth, the kind that comes with a cough, a trade-off. The poorer the coal, the worse the smoke. London was famous for burning cheap, sulphur-heavy coal called nutty slack. It was damp, crumbly, and burned like a vengeful ghost, but it was cheap and available, which was enough. You pass a baker's shop now, and the scent of bread momentarily cuts through the grime like a miracle. Sweet yeast, warm air, toasted crust. You close your eyes and drift toward it, only to have the moment shattered by a nearby fishmonger dumping a bucket of water into the street. It hits the cobbles with a splash and a smell like old socks fighting for dominance with a dead haddock. The wind changes. You retreat, gagging softly. Now here's a fun fact that isn't really fun. Victorian London was notorious for its great stinks, episodes when the city's already rancid air turned truly unbearable, usually due to a mix of heat, sewage overflow and industrial waste. The most famous occurred in 1858, when the Thames itself began to reek so badly that Parliament was nearly shut down by the smell. They tried soaking the curtains in lime water. It didn't work. Eventually it inspired the construction of a modern sewer system, which shockingly did work. Mostly. You pause beside a public urinal, one of those cast-iron marvels built to give men at least a chance to relieve themselves somewhere that wasn't the middle of the street. It's half-frozen, smells like vinegar and shame, and is occupied by a man who nods at you as he zips his fly and stumbles away. You do not enter. Women had no such luck, of course. Public toilets were few and far between, and most relied on chamber pots, alleyways, or holding it until holding it became its own crisis. There's scholarly debate about how sanitation inequity affected urban movement for women, especially in winter, when options were even scarcer. Some argue it limited mobility, others say women simply adapted. Either way, it wasn't great for dignity or hygiene. You pass a man hauling barrels of ashes to be dumped near a coal yard. They spill slightly as he walks, leaving grey trails on the snow like footprints from a ghost. Ash wasn't just a byproduct, it was a material in itself. People spread it on icy steps for traction, lined privies with it, mixed it with soap, used it to mask odours, which didn't work, but it felt like trying. And then, through all this, you catch a scent that doesn't belong, soap. You pause and realise you're passing a row house with laundry strung between windows. The scent of lye and lavender drifts down, faint but real. Clean clothes, drying in the frozen air, stiff as boards. It's a strange comfort, smelling something that doesn't want to kill you. A reminder that someone, somewhere, is still fighting back against the filth. One bar of soap at a time. You keep walking, the smells of the city washing over you like waves. Sweet and sour, burnt and raw, natural and chemical. The perfume of survival, Victorian London in all its glorious stink. By the time you reach the next corner, the snow is falling harder, muffling even the smells. You breathe in deeply, and for once it just smells like cold. A little coal, a little bread, a little life. Not clean, not pure, but real. The stink fades behind you as the city loosens its grip. One cobbled street becomes another, then another, and gradually the noise thins out. The carriages grow scarce, and the buildings stop pressing so close together. You're heading north now, where the fog is thinner and the air starts to taste a little cleaner. Still cold, still sharp, but less soaked in soot and human breath. The rhythm of your steps changes too, the clatter of boots now softened by open space and a thinner coat of snow. London's edge creeps up slowly, reluctant to let you go, but eventually it does. You reach a stretch of road bordered by hedges crusted in frost. Beyond them lies a long field dotted with the silhouettes of bare trees, their limbs curled skyward like knuckles reaching out of a grave. And farther still, low, dark hills, wrapped in snow, glimmering in the pale moonlight. You've reached the moors, not the romantic ones from literature, but the real deal. Raw, wild, wind-scoured. Beautiful, but in that way beauty can sometimes feel like a threat. Out here everything slows. There's no hustle of street vendors or clatter of horse hooves, just the crunch of your boots on soft snow, the whistle of wind over stone, and the occasional rustle of something small and alive beneath the brush. It's a different kind of winter here, one that doesn't care about your schedule or your responsibilities. Out here, winter simply is. No one to impress, nothing to prove. There's a stone wall half buried in the snow, lichen-covered and moss-choked, stretching like a scar across the land. You climb it slowly, hands numb inside your gloves. legs stiff from city walking. At the top, the world opens. The moor spreads before you in quiet defiance of civilization. No street lamps, no buildings, just a vast wind-bitten wilderness where your breath fogs and disappears into nothing. A figure appears in the distance. At first you think it's a tree. Then it moves. A slow, deliberate gait. A staff in one hand, something slung across their back. As they approach, you see it's a shepherd, or something close. An old man with a coat that looks handmade and a face that's mostly beard. He nods without slowing. "You're far out," he mutters in an accent thick as bread. "Cold'll bite harder up here." Then he vanishes behind the ridge. You believe him. Historically, the Victorian countryside was often imagined as quaint and serene, a pastoral counterpoint to the filth and chaos of urban life. But in winter, it could be every bit as brutal. Isolation meant slower rescue, longer walks for fuel or food, and more dangerous exposure to the elements. Moors were especially treacherous, unforgiving landscapes prone to sudden snowstorms, high winds, and bogs hiding just beneath the surface. You walk farther along the ridge, scarf tight around your face, your breath growing shallow from the cold. The wind picks up, not violently but with a steady persistence, like a hand pressing against your back. You see more stone walls in the distance, some forming crude pens, others marking forgotten boundaries. A ruined farmhouse appears, a hollow shell with no roof, just four walls crusted with ice and silence. A tangle of ivy still clings to one side. You duck inside for a moment, grateful for the windbreak. It's quiet here, almost too quiet. And that's when you start to notice it. The way the snow crunches differently, the odd whistle of wind through the broken windows, the hush of a place that's been empty too long. The moors are alive, yes, but not with people, with memory. And in the Victorian mind that meant ghosts. This was the perfect setting for stories, the wind, the ruins, the dark skies. The moors became symbolic terrain for the unknown. Novels like Wuthering Heights didn't choose this landscape accidentally. There's something wild here, something untouched and unexplainable. It doesn't need ghosts, but it welcomes them. You sit on a fallen beam and listen. Somewhere a bird calls, distant, shrill, then silence again. You find yourself thinking of those long Victorian nights when people gathered close around the fire and told stories about women in white wandering the heath, about phantom carriages heard but never seen, about lights flickering where no lantern should be. Out here, those stories don't feel like fiction. They feel like memory passed down in breath and shiver. A curious historical detail. Victorian England saw a sharp rise in reported ghost sightings, especially in the countryside. As railways expanded and rural areas were reached by city dwellers, the unfamiliar landscapes began to feel haunted, strange. The moors, in particular, earned a reputation. They weren't evil, just indifferent, which frankly was more frightening. You step outside again, blinking into the wind. Snow dances around you into little twisting flurries, brushing past your ears like whispers. The moon is barely visible now, a pale smear behind the clouds, and everything looks silver and blue. The city feels very far away. You wonder briefly what time it is, then realize it doesn't matter. Time works differently out here. You're not moving by minutes anymore, just by footsteps and warmth, or lack of it. There's debate too about how the countryside factored into Victorian life. Some saw it as a place of escape, of spiritual healing. Others viewed it as a place of exile, where the old, the sick, the poor went when the city no longer had room for them. Out here you might find quiet, or you might find that quiet has a price. A farmhouse appears in the distance, light spilling faintly from a single window. You approach slowly, unsure if it's real. A dog barks once, then goes silent. A moment later, the door opens and a woman steps out, shawl wrapped tight, holding a lantern. She watches you for a long moment, then nods once and returns inside. You don't follow, you're not here for shelter, not yet. You keep walking. The wind dies down briefly, long enough for you to hear your own footsteps again, and your heartbeat. You think of all the people who've walked these moors before, carrying wood, leading sheep, burying their dead, and all the stories told under these skies, all the lives tucked into the folds of this vast, sleeping land. You reach the top of another hill and look back. The city is a faint smudge of gold on the horizon now. The moors stretch before you, dark and endless, dusted in white, and somewhere beneath your feet the frost is creeping deeper into the earth, locking the season in place for just a little longer. You breathe in the cold and keep walking. The moors fall away behind you as you descend the slope, boots crunching over frostbitten grass and half-frozen puddles that shatter underfoot like glass candy. The land flattens again, curling into a skeletal village, the sort that sits quietly on the outskirts of the city like it's not entirely sure it belongs. Fewer chimneys here, fewer lights. Even the trees look hesitant, their branches clawing into the night like they're trying to escape. It's not quite the city, not quite the countryside. It's the in-between, and in the Victorian imagination, the in-between is where danger likes to wait. You pass a crumbling brick wall and a crooked iron gate where ivy grows in a desperate brittle tangle. A sign once nailed to the post now hangs by one rusted nail, swinging in the wind. You reach out and steady it with your gloved hand, just long enough to read the faded lettering. St. Olwen's Asylum for the Indigent and Infirmed in Mind. Then below that, in smaller letters, the kind that were likely added later, visitors by appointment only. Of course no one ever wants to visit a Victorian asylum. You're either working there, confined there, or standing outside it on a winter night wondering why your breath feels so heavy. The building looms ahead, 3 stories brick blackened, its windows tall and narrow like watchful eyes. The front lawn is dusted with snow, untouched but for the dark tracks of a wheelbarrow recently rolled across it. Smoke curls from a few chimneys, but otherwise the place is still. Too still. And yet inside you know there are people. Dozens, hundreds maybe, the ones who don't belong anywhere else. You step through the gate and the crunch of gravel underfoot sounds louder than it should. A lamp above the entry flickers, casting long shadows across the stone steps. You push open the heavy wooden door and are immediately struck by the change in air. It's warmer, but not cosy. Stale, like paper and bleach. A faint undercurrent of urine and coal. The heat comes from large cast-iron radiators that hiss in the corners of the narrow entry hall. They warm the space, but they also sweat, dripping moisture onto cracked tile. A nurse glances up from behind a desk. Her face pale and tight, her uniform is starched to within an inch of its life, and she clutches a clipboard like it's the last real thing she has control over. "Can't take visitors this late," she says automatically. You tell her you're just looking. She eyes you with suspicion, then shrugs. "Don't touch anything." You don't plan to. The hallway stretches forward like a spine lined with doors that are all the same shade of brownish green. You pass a few orderlies, young men with sleeves rolled to their elbows and the resigned posture of people who've learned not to ask questions. One pushes a mop down the corridor, another leads a patient in slippers and a nightgown back to their room. The patient is humming, not a song, just a sound. One long, wavering note that makes the hair on your arms rise. This is the part of winter no one wants to talk about. The part where cold does more than numb the body. It twists the mind. Isolation, illness, long nights with no light and too much silence. Victorian doctors debated endlessly about seasonal madness, whether it was a real condition or just an excuse for poor behaviour. But one thing they agreed on: more patients were admitted in the winter. Depression, mania, delusion, and no matter what they called it, the result was always the same: a room, a lock, a diagnosis. Here's your historical fact. Victorian asylums operated under a mixture of reform and cruelty. Some were built with good intentions, moral therapy, clean air, structured routines, but funding was thin, staff were thinner, and in the depths of winter many of these institutions became cold warehouses of the forgotten. Men and women were separated, stripped of personal belongings, and often silenced with medication or restraints. Treatments ranged from warm baths to induced vomiting, and for many, admission was permanent. You pass an open door and glimpse a room of beds lined like teeth, dozens of patients lying flat, blankets pulled to their chins. Most are still. A few stare at the ceiling. One woman whispers into her hands, over and over. You can't hear the words. Maybe that's for the best. Peculiar fringe fact? Some Victorians believed madness could be traced to diet or posture. One popular theory insisted that curved spines led to curved thoughts. Doctors prescribed spinal braces to straighten the mind. Others believed cold itself was the cause, that winter air weakened the spirit, leaving the brain vulnerable. So patients were often kept near fires, or alternately left outside to breathe the wind. There wasn't much consistency, just desperation. At the end of the hallway is a locked door. You don't have to try it. You know what's behind it. The worst rooms, the ones where the violent and the deeply broken are kept apart from the others. Some might be screaming, others won't make a sound for weeks. The doctors come and go, the nurses try to help, but winter creeps in even here, under the doors and between the bricks, and some minds just crack. There's scholarly debate, of course, about how effective these institutions truly were. Some argue they were necessary havens for those with no other options. Others call them prisons in all but name, especially for women who were often committed by husbands or fathers for nothing more than hysteria or nervousness. In truth, it was both. A place to treat illness, a place to bury inconvenience. You return to the front hall, nod at the nurse, and step back into the cold. The air hits your face like a reminder. Snowflakes swirl under the eaves. The windows of the asylum are fogged, but you swear you see movement behind them. Figures pacing, staring, lost in thought or memory. You wonder what they remember, or what they've forgotten to survive. You walk away. The iron gate groans as it closes behind you. And in the silence that follows, you hear something unexpected. Laughter. Distant, echoing from within the walls. Not mocking, not mad, just human. As if someone inside has found something to laugh about, even now, even here. The wind picks up again. You pull your coat tighter and keep moving. The laughter fades behind you, swallowed by the wind as the asylum disappears into the haze of snow and distance. It stays with you, though, trails behind your thoughts like the tail of a kite. Not haunting, exactly, just strange. In a night so heavy, a moment of levity can feel almost unnatural, but the city doesn't pause for reflection, and neither do your frozen toes. You press forward, breath puffing out in front of you, each exhale a small ghost of warmth. The road levels again, lights reappear, first scattered, then clustered. Signs painted in peeling gold, tailors, tobacconists, a butcher whose window displays something unidentifiable and glazed with frost. The smell of coal returns, wrapping around chimneys like a grey scarf. You've made your way back to a working-class neighbourhood on the city's eastern edge, a place where the buildings lean together as if to share warmth, and nothing moves quickly, not even the sunrise. This is where people rise before the city does, not because they want to, because they must. And they don't rely on alarm clocks, they rely on someone far less mechanical. Clack! There it is again. Clack! Clack! You pause at the mouth of a narrow lane and see her, a woman with a bundle of sticks over one shoulder, tapping on a second-floor window with what looks like a long cane. She steps back, waits. A faint light flickers behind the glass. Job done, she moves on. She's a knocker-up, one of the more peculiar but essential winter professions of the Victorian city. A human alarm clock hired to wake workers before dawn with a tap at the window. No bells, no shouting, just a rhythm against the glass, subtle, persistent, enough to rouse the sleeping, but not the neighbours. You follow her for a moment, her silhouette outlined by the snow-dimmed gas lamps. She moves quickly, methodically. Tap. Wait. Move on. She doesn't glance back at you. She's got a list to finish before sunrise and about 4 hours of sleep waiting for her when she's done, if she's lucky. Historically, knockers-up were often women, widows, the elderly, single mothers, doing what they could to earn a few coins in a city that had little to spare. Clients paid by the week. Some preferred a soft tap on the door, others wanted a knock on the window pane. In poorer homes, where shutters were thin and sleep was fragile, even a whispered name under the sill could be enough. You trail her past a row of brick homes stacked tight together like her books on a shelf. Curtains twitch. A man opens a window and nods down to her. She tips her cane and moves on, her boots slipping slightly on the icy stones. Another worker risen from a too-short sleep heading for another 10 hours of damp boots, bad pay and frozen fingers. And you, well, you keep walking. Past doorsteps where someone's already set out a pail of coal, past a group of men gathered around a lamplight, stamping their feet and blowing into their hands. You can tell the new hires by the way they talk. The old ones don't waste breath. This is the bleak commute, the slow march from home to factory, shipyard or construction site. Most will work in the cold. Many will work in sequence. All will return long after the sun has set again. You round another corner and see a boy leaning against a post half asleep, holding a wooden box full of brushes and polish, a bootblack waiting for customers who won't come for hours. Still, he's here, better to be early than forgotten. A baker's cart rolls by, steam rising from a covered tray. You catch the scent of fresh rolls and your stomach twists a little. The man steering the cart nods to the boy and tosses him a heel of bread. The boy catches it mid-air. No thanks given. This isn't charity. It's ritual. One they've likely done every morning this winter. Here's your historical moment. Before industrialisation fully settled into electric schedules and factory bells, the Victorian world depended on people like the knocker-up to keep its rhythm. It was precise in its way and deeply human. You weren't just paying for a service. You were trusting someone to hold you to the day. Strangely, there were fringe debates even then about whether the knocker-up was more reliable than modern contraptions. Alarm clocks existed in the 19th century, but they were expensive, finicky, and prone to failure. Many factories found it cheaper to pay a woman with a stick than risk 20 men showing up late because some spring failed to wind properly. There's something almost sacred about the job. You realise that as you watch her tap another window, twice, pause, then move on. She doesn't know the stories behind those panes. Who sleeps there, what they fear, what they dream. She just knocks and keeps them moving. The scholarly debate here, for those who care to argue it, is whether this system reflects a beautifully cooperative society or just a grim adaptation to systemic poverty. Some view the knocker-up as a symbol of community, neighbours helping neighbours in the dark. Others see it as evidence of a system where people are forced to work while half awake, frozen and exhausted, simply to survive. Either way, it worked, until the clocks took over. You pause now at a narrow alley, where a group of young apprentices huddle around a single candle inside a glass jar. They're telling stories quietly fast, about a supervisor who once fell into a vat of dye, about a co-worker who lost a toe last winter. One boy says he heard someone's fingers froze and snapped right off. The others laugh too loud, nervous laughter. The candle flickers. One of them sees you watching and waves. "You working too?" he calls. You nod, though you're not sure what your job is anymore. Maybe it's just walking, witnessing, recording what warmth is left before the next storm comes. Behind you the sky begins to pale, not blue, but a sickly grey smudged with smoke and frost. The street grows louder. Doors open, carts rattle, boots scrape. The city is waking. And far down the road, almost too faint to see, the knocker-up raises her stick one last time. Clack! The first light of day is more suggestion than fact, just a thin wash of grey over the rooftops, enough to separate sky from smoke, but not enough to chase away the street lamps still flickering in protest. The city doesn't so much wake as groan. You can feel it in your bones, in the sluggishness of footsteps and the low mutter of tired voices, but as the fog shifts and the chimneys begin to cough into life, something stirs beneath the chill, something more than routine, something odd. You find yourself on a different kind of street now, tucked just behind a schoolhouse and a greengrocer's stand still covered in canvas. Here, in a cramped courtyard littered with footprints and scraps of paper, children are gathering, not for work, not for prayer, but for entertainment. The wind is still cruel, but the crowd pulls tight together, like penguins, and their breath fogs the air in puffs that turn every whisper into mist. At the front of the crowd stands a man in a long wool coat with bulging pockets and a face like he's been carved out of walnut. He carries a wooden box with a crank on the side. He places it gently on a stool, opens the front panel, and pulls out a small glass lens. The box begins to glow from within. A screen is unfurled. The crowd leans in. The magic lantern show is about to begin. This is Victorian multimedia, long before movies, even before proper slideshows. A candle and a clever series of painted glass slides combine to project moving pictures. Sort of. If you squint, if you believe, and children, in particular, are very good at believing. He cranks the handle slowly. The lantern hums as it heats up. And then, on the sheet before them, a shape appears. A man running, being chased by a skeleton with a scythe. The crowd gasps. The lanternist laughs softly and begins his narration. "Ladies and gentlemen," he says in a voice far too dramatic for this hour of the morning, "behold the tale of greedy George who stole a pie, lied to his mum, and was visited that very night by the spirit of regret with his eternal spoon." The children howl with laughter. The story continues, slide after slide, each more absurd than the last. A runaway pig, a haunted pudding, a pair of boots possessed by dance fever. This isn't high art. It's low-cost, high-drama, moral instruction with a heavy layer of slapstick, and it's glorious. Historically, magic lantern shows were a kind of travelling miracle. Some were educational, natural history, geography, astronomy, but most, especially in the poorer neighbourhoods, leaned heavily into the ridiculous or the grotesque. They were equal parts entertainment and warning. Behave, or your shadow might come alive and drag you into a painting. One fringe fact, there were entire series of lantern slides devoted to supernatural hygiene. Truly. Ghosts warning children to brush their teeth, devils snatching boys who didn't wash behind their ears, skeletons lurking in piles of unwashed laundry. These were the YouTube jump scares of their day. The man clicks to a final image, George, now contrite, mopping a floor while the spirit of regret watches approvingly. The children applaud with mittened hands, giggling and jostling for a better look. Coins are dropped into a tin cup and the lantern is closed with a practiced snap. Just like that, the screen vanishes. The magic fades. But the kids don't go home, not yet. From around the corner comes another figure, a boy, no more than 12, carrying a small wooden box with a slit in the front. He's offering a peep show, not the kind that word suggests now, but a series of tiny illustrated scenes that can be viewed through the lens as he narrates the drama. The Battle of Trafalgar, he says proudly, or the Pirate Queen of Portugal, if you prefer adventure. His voice is squeaky with the tail end of a head cold. You take a peek. Inside is a tiny world, ships and smoke, cannons mid-blast, sailors clinging to rigging. The perspective shifts slightly as the boy tilts the box, creating the illusion of motion. It's handmade, of course, the drawings are uneven, the colours faded, but it works. You feel it. That little jolt of wonder. These kinds of amusements weren't just distractions. They were survival, a break in the bleakness, a way to make winter feel like something other than a punishment. Nearby, a girl opens a tin and begins selling halfpenny horrors, small printed booklets cheaply made, full of murder, monsters and moral collapse. She shouts, "New tale today! Man bites dog and turns into werewolf, only a halfpenny!" Children swarm her. One kid insists he already was a werewolf last week. She rolls her eyes and tells him he's got to pay if he wants to stay transformed. These horror leaflets were the Victorian version of viral videos, short, shocking, and usually exaggerated beyond recognition. A train crash where a baby survives by clinging to a dog's tail, a woman who laughs so hard she explodes, a ghost who knocks on a coffin to say he's not done haunting yet. Scholars still debate the effect of all this weirdness. Did it desensitize kids to violence, or prepare them for a world that was already terrifying? Some argue these stories offered catharsis. Others say they simply mirrored a reality where fear was part of daily life. Either way, they were popular. Even adults read them, pretending they didn't. You step back and watch it all unfold. The lanternist packing his things, the boy showing off his peep box, the girl setting her leaflets. Around them, the children laugh and argue and read aloud in groups, their cold reddened noses dripping, their breath mingling like smoke. It's still winter, still freezing, still harsh. But for a moment, it's also absurd, vibrant, alive. The magic lantern man lights a small cigarette and grins at you as he passes. "Cold don't bother the kids when they've got monsters," he says. "Shame we can't all be scared for fun." Then he disappears into the mist. You linger a moment longer, listening to the rising hum of the street as the world wakes again. The fog swallows the last glow of the lantern. The children scatter, running off in all directions like sparks from a dying fire. And behind you, the screen still hangs from the schoolhouse wall, empty now, but you swear for a sound it glows. You leave the schoolyard just as the fog begins to lift, not vanish, mind you, but rise. It peels away from the cobbles like steam off a kettle, slow and stubborn. Above, the sky lightens from bruised grey to something closer to pewter, dull and promising nothing. But even this dim suggestion of daylight feels foreign after the hours you've spent wandering London's winter night. You blink like someone who's forgotten what daytime looks like, and the city, it's adjusting too. Shops unlatch their shutters, market stalls unfold like sleepy butterflies, stiff and cold and waiting for the hum of business. Barrows roll down side streets stacked with turnips, potatoes and the occasional sad-looking carrot. The butcher lays out his meat, breath fogging the glass. A man scrubs yesterday's chalk from a menu board with a wet rag, and next door, a fishmonger dumps a bucket of crushed ice onto a wooden slab ready to display whatever's been hauled in from the docks, if anything survived the frost. You wander into a proper market square now, tucked between four-storey buildings with soot-grimed windows and uneven slate roofs. The air here is thick with overlapping scents: wet wool, tobacco, coal smoke, cabbage, fish, and something sweet you can't quite place. Maybe roasted chestnuts. Or maybe it's just your brain inventing comfort. This isn't the kind of market where people browse casually, cradling tea and pointing at artisanal jam. No one here has time for that. This is fast-paced, elbow-to-rib business. Coins clink, boots stomp. Voices shout prices like they're trying to win a shouting contest against time, and everyone is bargaining, loudly, dramatically. Whether it's a sack of onions or a chipped ladle, you'd think the fate of the empire depended on shaving off a halfpenny. A woman passes you, dragging a basket on wheels. Her fingers are blue with cold, and she's muttering to herself as she examines a bunch of wilted greens. "Too dear," she says, though no one's asked. "Too dear for rot like that." She moves on, trailing an unmistakable scent of vinegar and hair tonic. Victorian winter markets were a mess of necessity and grit. They were open air most of the time, sheltered only by canopies or patched awnings that did very little against sleet. Vendors came early and left late, working fingers numb to arrange goods that would be half frozen by mid-morning. Bread grew stiff, apples turned to mush, and anything not nailed down got nicked by children with sharp eyes and sharper hunger. You pass a stall selling second-hand clothes. The items hang like ghosts: wool coats with threadbare sleeves, scarves with old initials sewn in, boots 2 sizes too small but still better than none. The vendor is an older man with a moustache that looks like it's plotting rebellion. "Wool coat, sir," he calls. "Still got the smell of a gentleman on it." You're not sure that's a selling point. Next to him, a woman sells broken crockery and warped pans. "Perfect for warming milk," she insists, holding up a dented pot with a hole you could pass a finger through. "Just plug it with bread." You admire her optimism. Here's a quirky historical nugget. Some Victorian market sellers would fake warmth to entice buyers. They'd position themselves near hot bricks or small fires, then let the smell of warm pastry or soup drift toward customers, even if they weren't actually selling food. The idea was simple. Warmth scent equals comfort, which equals spending. Psychology before anyone had a name for it. You stop at a stall selling sweets, treacle toffee, peppermint sticks, barley sugar twists so sharp they could double as weapons. The woman behind the table offers you a square of fudge so hard it might crack a molar. "Made it myself," she says proudly. "No chalk in it, unlike his lot." She jerks a thumb toward a rival sweet vendor 10 feet away, who responds by loudly announcing that her toffee tastes like boiled socks. This, apparently, is how sweetmakers in London do battle. You take the fudge and crunch into it. It tastes like a brick soaked in molasses, but you smile anyway. The sugar jolt hits your bloodstream like a firework, and for a moment, you forget that your socks are wet and your fingers are curling into little claws inside your gloves. Across the way, a man is selling newspapers. His voice is hoarse from shouting headlines. "Big frost comin', bigger than last year," he bellows. "City not ready, pipes freezin', baker's short on flour." It could be true, it could also just be theatre. In the Victorian era, newsboys were walking advertisements and amateur actors. Exaggeration was part of the job. So was repetition. The same headline might be shouted a dozen different ways depending on the street. A group of children passes, eyes wide as they scan the stalls. One girl reaches for an apple, hesitates, then thinks better of it. A boy behind her isn't so cautious. He snatches a meat pie and vanishes into the crowd like a magician's rabbit. The vendor doesn't even shout, just sighs and marks the loss in a tiny notebook. There's debate, of course, about whether markets were truly egalitarian spaces. On one hand, anyone could sell, anyone could buy, the poor could haggle, trade or steal. On the other hand, the quality was uneven. Prices fluctuated wildly, and your success often depended on how charming, loud or aggressive you were. Some saw markets as community lifelines, others saw them as battlegrounds. You stop near a brazier where a man is roasting chestnuts, the shells popping as they split. The scent is rich and earthy, smoke curling around the brass pot like a halo. You buy a handful. They're hot, salty, and taste vaguely of charcoal, but they're perfect. And then, as if choreographed by a particularly dramatic stage manager, Ninja begins to fall again, light at first, then thicker. It drifts down between awnings, settles in baskets, clings to wool and ribbon. The market doesn't stop, people simply adjust. Umbrellas appear, hats are pulled tighter, vendors cover their tables with canvas. This is London. Winter doesn't cancel life. it just rearranges it. You watch as a man wraps a slab of butter in newspaper and hands it off to a customer who looks like he hasn't smiled since the Crimean War. A little girl spins in the snow, chasing flakes with her tongue. The sweet seller slips a peppermint stick into her pocket when no one's looking. And somewhere in all this bustle, you feel it, that small pulse of warmth, not heat, not comfort, but life. The city doing what it does best, enduring, adapting, surviving. One frozen toe at a time, the market fades behind you, its noise and chatter trailing off like the last notes of a song that no one officially ended. Your coat is heavier now, weighted with damp wool and coal dust, maybe a bit of melted snow and the lingering smell of that not quite fudge. You feel it in your boots too, which squelch slightly as you step back into a street that's already covered in a thin crust of fresh snow. The tracks of early morning wagons have cut brown streaks into the white, turning it into something less magical and more muddy. London magic rarely lasts long before someone steps in it. Still, the city has shifted. Morning has arrived, not brightly, not triumphantly, but the way a Victorian morning should, with a long sigh, a lukewarm cup of tea, and a coal fire that's not quite hot enough. The gas lamps sputter out one by one, and natural light fights its way through the mist like an underdog in a fist fight. The city is officially awake. You pass rows of terraced houses, their windows glowing with weak candlelight or the orange shimmer of small hearths. Chimneys spew a steady stream of smoke into the pale sky, and from within you catch snatches of morning sounds, pans clattering, boots thudding on stairs, a baby crying, someone singing off-key about tea and jam. The smell of toast, real toast, follows you for a block and a half, and it's the cruelest thing you've experienced all night. You step into a quieter street, where the buildings are older, the bricks blackened by a century of smoke and the corners chipped like worn teeth. This is the heart of a rookeries, the dense, working-class tenements that define London's darker geography. Here, the alleyways are narrow enough to lean out a window and shake hands with your neighbour across the gap. Laundry lines crisscross the air like spiderwebs, sagging with frozen sheets that flap like flags of surrender. You duck under one, brushing past a group of children clustered around a crack in the wall, where steam is leaking from some underground pipe. They hover there like moths around a candle, hands outstretched to catch whatever warmth they can steal. One of them looks up at you with soot-smudged cheeks and a runny nose. "You cold?" she asks, not with sympathy, just curiosity. You nod. She shrugs. "We're not." Then she buries her hands in her armpits and resumes shivering in place. Inside these buildings, the morning rituals are a symphony of scraping chairs, coughing and boiling water. The stoves, if there are stoves, are lit with paper and hope. Many families live in single rooms, parents and children, and sometimes boarders crammed together, like sardines in a can that forgot to include oil or dignity. Privacy is a rumour. Heat is an achievement. You glance up at the windows. One reveals a mother washing a child in a basin, her hands red with cold. Another shows a man shaving over a cracked mirror, his breath fogging the glass. A third window is broken and stuffed with rags, letting out both smoke and sound. A woman shouting something about rent, and someone else pretending not to hear her. Here's your historical anchor. By the mid-1800s, these rookeries were infamous. Dickens wrote about them. Social reformers documented them. The government tried, mostly in vain, to demolish or regulate them. But they persisted, not out of defiance, but necessity. They were cheap, available, packed with the city's workers, widows, migrants, and those with nowhere else to go. 10, 12, 15 to a room. Shared water pumps, outdoor privies, rats that could read a calendar. A fringe detail? Some residents, desperate for warmth, would set up makeshift fires in the street, burning anything they could find. Furniture, shoe leather, even old shoes themselves. The smell was horrendous, but the heat was real, and in a city this cold, heat wins every time. You pass a narrow alleyway and glance down it, instinctively cautious. Even in daylight, these twisting corridors are barely lit. A man emerges, brushing flour from his sleeves. A baker's assistant, maybe. He nods at you, yawns, and heads off into the fog. Behind him, you hear coughing. Someone else wheezing. Then a door slams. Then silence. Debate lingers among historians about whether these places were purely hellish or misunderstood communities. Some argue that the rookeries fostered connection, Neighbours looked after each other, shared coal, helped with children. Others point to the filth, disease and high crime rates. Maybe both are true. Maybe that's the trick with Victorian London. It's never one thing. It's the bakery and the alley, the peppermint stick and the plague. You step carefully through the slush where broken bricks and scattered rubbish make footing treacherous. At the end of the street, a small crowd has formed around a cart with a sign that reads "Penny Breakfasts." The man behind it ladles porridge into chipped bowls, steam rising like incense. The line moves slowly. No one speaks much. Just nods and mutters thanks. You don't need to ask what's in the porridge. You already know. Oats, water, maybe a bit of lard or treacle if you're lucky. Not delicious, but hot. And right now that's enough. You watch a boy barely tall enough to see over the counter get his portion, cradle it in mittenless hands, and walk away with the kind of focus usually reserved for open-heart surgery. He turns down a side street and vanishes. The snow has stopped again, leaving behind a glistening crust on rooftops and railings. A crow lands on a chimney pot and caws once, like it's taking roll call. Below, the city begins to move in earnest. The day's full footstep is arriving, and you're still walking. Past rows of homes where the fire's barely warm enough to melt the frost on the window panes. Past a man hauling coal sacks with a limp and a song you can't quite place. Past women in aprons opening bakery doors, fanning out the heat as if generosity can pay rent. Past a dog nosing through the slush for yesterday's bones. You keep going through the heart of it all. Not just the London that gets remembered, but the London that kept moving even when it should have curled up and hibernated. The streets begin to flatten under the morning light, though it's a lazy kind of light, barely strong enough to scrape the frost from the rooftops. Even so, it's enough to make you squint for the first time in hours. The world is no longer bathed in gaslight and moonglow. Now it's the pale, unsympathetic grey of midwinter morning, a sky the exact shade of tin. Not warm, not cruel, just there. And somehow that's almost worse. You're back now in a quieter stretch of the city, neither rookery nor marketplace, but somewhere in between. The homes are larger here. Brick townhouses with iron railings and polished knockers, doorsteps swept clean despite the weather. The windows are high, the curtains thick, and the coal smoke that puffs from these chimneys smells more refined, as if even combustion is gentrified. It's the quiet that strikes you most. No shouting vendors, no shivering crowds, just the occasional clip-clop of hooves as a private carriage pulls away, likely carrying some fog-eyed gentleman to the exchange or a sleepy heiress to a piano lesson. You glance through the window of one townhouse and spot a drawing room where everything is symmetrical and upholstered. A maid lays a cloth over a breakfast table where no one's yet bothered to sit. This is upstairs, not just in social standing, but in geography. Everything here is raised. Porches, ceilings, expectations. The cold is still present, of course, but it's managed. Mitigated. There are fires lit before dawn. Gloves lined with real fur. Breakfast that arrive hot. Bedpans that are emptied by someone else's hands. You pass an alley flanked by two sets of servants' stairs. Down one of them comes a boy, likely a scullery assistant, carrying a tin bucket steaming with waste. He dumps it into the gutter with a practised motion, wipes his nose on his sleeve and vanishes back below like a ghost in livery. This is downstairs, and the difference is as stark as brick and velvet. Inside the same house, just beyond your view, he'll spend the next few hours peeling potatoes, scrubbing boots, and hauling coals to grates already warming the feet of people who've yet to open their eyes. You come to a mews tucked behind the row, an old stable yard repurposed for service entrances, where the work happens invisibly. Laundry flaps from lines. A cook's assistant stokes a brazier near the open back door of a townhouse kitchen. You hear pans clatter, someone yelling about cream, and the faint thud of a dropped rolling pin. The smell of baking mingles with coal smoke in a way that's briefly unfairly wonderful. One of the kitchen maids, young, no more than 16, stands with her hands over the brazier, eyes half closed. Her apron is singed, her boots are soaked through. She hears you walking past, opens one eye and mutters, "You want a job? The scullery girl quit this morning, or died. Hard to say." You decline, politely. Victorian servant life was nothing if not hierarchical, and winter made those lines even sharper. For the families upstairs, winter was an inconvenience. A season to be conquered with extra coal, thicker curtains and clever conversation. For the staff below, it was labour multiplied. Fires to light in freezing rooms, rugs to beat in icy courtyards, boots to scrub while your own toes went numb. Water froze in basins, pipes burst. Sheets had to be ironed before they could be laid on beds. And heaven help you if the jam came up cold. Here's your historical fact. Many households kept strict winter routines, including warming pan duty, where servants were expected to heat brass pans filled with coals and slide them between the bedsheets of the family before bedtime. The pans were heavy, dangerously hot, and had to be kept moving to avoid burning the sheets. A good warming pan job was one that didn't set the bed on fire. Meanwhile, downstairs bedrooms, if you could call them that, were often unheated. Attics and basements with no insulation, shared straw mattresses, blankets so thin you might as well sleep in your coat, and sometimes they did. You continue along the mews, passing a coal chute where a recent delivery has left a trail of black dust up the wall and across the stones. Coal is currency in winter, and no one wastes it. Even the ash is saved, scattered on icy steps, stuffed in cracks, mixed into soap for extra grit. Every fire upstairs burns because someone downstairs carried a bucket up 3 flights of stairs, twice. The open question, the one historians still argue about, is whether this strict division of winter comfort truly sustained the illusion of civility. Did the fire in the drawing room justify the frostbite in the scullery? Or did the entire structure rely on pretending the downstairs half of the house simply didn't exist? It's a polite debate, of course, but the evidence is literal, carved into the floor plans. Warmth built up, not down. You circle back toward the front of the houses now, where the stoops are tidy and the door knockers gleam. The servants have already come and gone, delivered the milk, fetched the water, trimmed the lamps. Their work is invisible, absorbed by the polished calm of the facade. A gentleman in a fine coat steps out, checks his pocket watch, and nods to you like he's acknowledging another member of the correct species. His breath steams in the air, but he doesn't shiver. His coat is lined. His gloves are new. He steps into a waiting carriage without so much as adjusting his scarf. You continue on foot. You pass one final townhouse where the curtains are still open. Inside, a fire burns low in the grate, and beside it, a maid slumps in a chair, fast asleep with a half-peeled potato in her lap. The room is empty otherwise. The family hasn't come down yet. She's stolen a moment, or the moment's stolen her. You watch her for a second too long, then you move on. And just like that, the sun edges over the buildings. Not bright, not warm, but definite. The shadows shorten. The frost on the iron fences begins to melt. You realise you've been walking all night, all through the city, through its gutters and parlours, its lantern shows and asylum wings, its frozen bread lines and bone-warm drawing rooms. And now, at last, you've reached the edge of morning. The candle is low, the last ember in the grate hisses, sighs, and dies. You exhale, and keep walking. You've made it. Morning has folded itself into the city at last, and though the light still feels like it was wrung from damp rags, it's enough to see clearly now, enough to let your shoulders drop, your breath slow, your steps loosen from the rhythm of the long night. You've walked through it all, from the frostbitten eaves of the rookeries to the flickering hearths of drawing rooms, from the lantern-lit illusions of haunted children's tales to the deadpan silence of asylums locked under layers of snow and shame. And now the city stretches, yawns, and pretends it wasn't up all night trembling. You find a quiet bench in a square that smells faintly of wet stone and spent matches. The seat is damp. The wind has a bite. But you sit anyway, because your legs have earned it. Your coat creaks as you settle in. Somewhere nearby, a bell rings. Not urgently, not to summon or scold, but just because it's time to. The city breathes, horses clop, chimneys churn, and above it all the pale sun wobbles its way upward, like it's just been told to behave. You look around, the city's still here. Not ruined, not frozen in place, just changed by the night. The fog's thinned, the frost is softening on the windows. Life is returning in small, brave movements. The curl of smoke from a bakery vent, the squeak of boots on stone, a curtain drawn aside by hands that still don't quite trust the daylight. And you've made it through. All 30,000 words of grit, candlelight, shivering laughter and muffled despair. You've seen what it took to survive a Victorian winter night. Not just fire and food, but story and superstition, neighbour and nerve. You've walked where history rarely lingers. Not where the king sat, but where the pipes burst. Now it's your turn to drift off. Let the wind hush to a whisper. Let the snow settle. Let the last glow of the street lamp fade behind your eyes like a dying star. The fire's out. The night is over. You can rest now.